Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good day to everyone. I suggest we start. Thank you for being here, and thank you also to those who are following us online. And there's a lot of them. And unfortunately, the speaker's mic is not working anymore, so the interpreter cannot hear them. Could you please remind the speaker to turn on his mic? Thank you. And it's working now. So I'm going to give the floor right away to Mr. Piotr Kalbecki, who's the president, the chair of the NAT Commission, which brings together mayors, councillors and regional, and again, unfortunately, the mic is off and the interpreter cannot hear the speaker. Apologies for this. So, I'm going to give the floor right away to Mr. Piotr Kalbecki, who's the chair of the NAT Commission, which brings together mayors, councillors and regional presidents to discuss a wide range of topics related to rural development, health, agriculture, forestry, fishery, etc., etc. The local dimension is crucial to discuss the topic that we wish to discuss today, and which is about specifically construction permits for the development of the livestock sector in the EU. Chair Kalbecki, I'll give you the floor for 5 minutes, and I would like to thank you warmly for welcoming the Sustainable Livestock Intergroup at the Committee of Regions today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Also, thank you very much, all of you. Is bon. Marche? Marche. It's okay. Now it's okay. Now it's okay. Yeah. So, dear experts and dear participants, I'm very pleased to welcome the Sustainable Livestock EP Intergroup meeting for the second time in the European Committee of the Regions. That is really a pleasure and honor to host you, and especially today, where it's so hot outside and comfortable atmosphere to discuss here. So, welcome. Today's topic is particularly important for rural areas and very timely, as the Commission will publish its livestock strategy on 1st July. Europe's agriculture sector can and should become more modern and sustainable by simplifying environmental rules while maintaining high standards. Cutting unnecessary red tape from permits and environmental assessment to cap requirements can encourage investment without weakening our climate and natural goals. Local and regional authorities, ladies and gentlemen, which implement most EU legislation on the ground, have a key role to play in it. Let me give you 3 examples. The first, simplifying permits and authorizings. Farmers investing in modern facilities, barns, measure storage, water reservoirs, or renewable energy often must deal with several permits and long approval procedures. The Commission's 2025 Environmental Omnibus proposed single points of contact for environmental permits and assessments, a model that local and regional authorities would typically host. This one-stop service approach eliminates farmers' need to navigate multiply agencies, shortening times, and providing one inference for all green requirements. That is possible. A good example comes from the Madrid region in Spain, where GPS, small collars for the cattle, reduce the need for fences and other infrastructures. This shows how innovation, supported by regional authorities, can simplify procedures while delivering environmental benefits. Second, simplifying environmental assessments. Small farm investments are often delayed because of overlapping environmental assessment procedures. For instance, a rancher building a water pond or stable near a Natura 2000 site may need both an AIA and under EIA directive and a priority assessment under Habitats Directive, each which public consultations and paperwork creating duplication. At the same time, many local authorities lack the staff and experiences needed to process application quickly. The Committee of the Regions support creating well-equipped single points of contact that can manage those assessments more effectively. Local and regional authorities should also be able to adapt requirements for low-impact projects so that simple investments are not bordered by uncuracy procedures. First, simplifying CAP environmental scams. CAP eco scams and agri-environment measures are important, but they are often too complicated for farmers. Local and regional authorities can make participation easier by providing advice, standard templates and solutions adapted to local needs. Regions such as Brittany and Andalusia have already shown that collective approach can reduce paperwork for individual farmers. The LEADER program also demonstrates that local management can simplify access to funding while supporting sustainable rural development. Conclusion. Simplification, when done properly, can encourage an investment in more sustainable livestock farming while protecting the environment. But simplification must never mean lowering environmental standards. Local and regional authorities are essential partners in this process. With the right resources and responsibilities, they can ensure that simpler rules work effectively and reflect local realities. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion here today. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We are waiting for Ms. Grappini, but she's going to come later, so I'm going to give her the floor later on. Before we start our discussion, I would like to share some reflections with you. I myself am a livestock farmer, and I live in a deeply agricultural region, and I've been observing for several years a deep social change in our countrysides. When my father was still working, most of the inhabitants of rural areas had, to some extent, a link with agriculture. They knew the realities of the job, the constraints related to seasons, and livestock and farming practices. But unfortunately, today, this is not the case anymore. Everywhere in Europe, newcomers are arriving in rural areas, and environmental requirements are strengthened, and this led to an increase in disputes related to agricultural activities, odors, machinery noise, roosters, tractor movement, dust, opposition to the building of new agricultural buildings or to biomethane units. In France, the Parliament even adopted in 2023 a law aiming at better protecting farmers against what can be considered again as abusive litigation. In other words, we reach a point when we need to legislate in order to allow farmers to do their job, a job which consists of feeding us, very simply. Can you believe it? What strikes me most are the contradictions farmers, and specifically livestock farmers, are faced with today. On the one hand, everyone, consumers, NGOs, European institutions, health and environment ministries, tell us that we need to produce and eat local. But on the other side, each livestock farm modernization or expansion project is very often hindered because of administrative appeals, petitions, or local movements, even when they are fully compliant with environmental norms in place. And that is what we call the NIMBY phenomenon, the not in my backyard phenomenon, which is now becoming ever more worrying and which might risk in some territories to cripple any investment capability. And yet there's another contradiction. We want local food produced thanks to less antibiotics, meeting the highest standards in terms of animal welfare and environmental protection, while remaining affordable for the consumers. But too often we forget that this requires economically viable and competitive farms. Without this, we might risk replacing progressively our local production by imports coming from regions of the world that do not meet the same health, environmental or social requirements that we do. And most of the time, these imports have a higher carbon footprint. And in addition to this social pressure, there's regulation pressure, growing regulation pressure. The agricultural movements of 2024 have highlighted the widely shared sentiment amongst farmers about a never-increasing number of administrative, environmental and digital controls that most of the time are repetitive and very difficult to manage every day. This raises another paradox. We ask livestock farmers to invest in more modern buildings, that perform better, that are more respectful of the environment and animal welfare. But these investments are very difficult to implement in the field, and this leads to a great frustration and uncertainty for farmers. And this might risk slowing down investments which are indispensable to the modernization of these farms. And these investments are not only necessary to ensure the competitiveness of this industry, of the sector, but they are also a crucial lever to increase animal welfare and speed up the environmental transition of our livestock system. Two goals which are stipulated by European citizens whenever they are asked about the future of livestock farming. So how can we exit this dispute, this conflict? How can we exit these contradictions? How can we reconcile social expectations, environmental ambitions, and the need to maintain a strong and competitive European agricultural production? Well, this is precisely what we are going to try and discuss today with our speakers. Our discussion is going to be divided in 3 panels. The first one is going to be a setting of the scene to better frame this discussion. And to this end, I would like to thank Professor Roel Jongeneel from the Wageningen University for being here with us. Professor, I'm going to give you the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also for the invitation to be here and to share a number of reflections and thoughts. I think what in a lot of discussions, by the way, let me introduce myself. I'm a farmer's son and I'm also an agricultural economist from Wageningen. And as economists, we are also always looking to the economic side, economic viability of taking environmental measures. And maybe, so I will make a number of remarks about competitiveness, but maybe I can start with an anecdote. There was a shoe factory here, somewhere here in Europe, who sent 2 salesmen to Africa to explore that market. And the first salesman person which came there said, I will come back tomorrow because no one is wearing shoes here. So this is the other one was also the other day sending an email to the headquarters, and he said, there's a fantastic place here. No one is yet wearing shoes, so we have a fantastic market. So competitiveness is about exploring markets, providing services, and making things working better. And if that succeeds, it's a service for the people, consumers, but it's also a service for the producers, because in the end we better connect things. So in that sense, competitiveness in economics is different from, say, competition in sports, where we have one winner who takes it all. But here it is actually about benefiting to us all, at least if you are from a good perspective of competitiveness. Now, there is a lot of emphasis on the economy and the economic side, and I will contribute to that. But what we have run into more and more is so what we call the planetary boundaries, or I would call it preferably also ecological boundaries, because it is also more local, which requires, say, enabling policies for a good stewardship. And I'm coming from a country where we have these tensions, I think, more than in any other region at the moment in Europe, how to balance, say, biodiversity, the economy, and social things. And you see here a picture of one of the publications we made about that. In a nutshell, what my message is today is that the livestock sector plays a very important role in the EU agriculture and in the EU food system. About 40% of the total value produced comes from the livestock sector. It provides essential proteins, and it's contributing, say, in an important way to the living of farmers. But it has also a number of serious externalities. That are the challenges. Just like in the desert in Africa, there are challenges if you have to sell shoes. So it is about challenges. I think the best way to approach the issues which we face is what we now is more and more used in, also in economics, is about to say we have. It's not only about money, it's about broad welfare. If you have a lot of a country with a high population density, like we have in the Netherlands, and wealthy people, they concern about the environment, they concern about the climate and the quality. And so we need to have a broader perspective, broad prosperity, broad welfare perspective, to balance different things. Now what you see is that policies often intend to do this, but it is a tension. It's not an easy task, and so in that sense, a lot of appreciation for good policymakers. It's very important. I think in the Netherlands, since 2019, the sector has more or less been stalled due to, I think, also the court, the European court, and the Dutch court evaluated that the Dutch government policy was not, say, living up to the standards they should do, kind of policy failures. But in the end, it's a bad situation for the environment and for the sector both. What I think is very crucial is to improve that we have good management practices as well as good investments, as was just also said by the chairman, that we let these things develop and coming together. And for that we need innovative policy approaches, more innovative than we currently probably have, or at least exploit every possibility. That's in a nutshell what I would like to tell. Now, let me make a remark. Here you see a slide which has probably too much information, but this is a slide which gives some information about the livestock sector in the EU. We have about 3.7 million holdings, a production value of 170 billion euro. It's widespread throughout the whole EU. But if you look to the details, you see, except for the poultry sector, it's more or less in all other respects, say the herds are, the sector is on a decline or stagnating. The good news is that if you look to the demand side, the EU is more than self-sufficient for more or less all these products, which is, of course, if you think about strategic autonomy and food security, a good issue. But it also reflects that the livestock sector is, I would say, not a very flourishing sector, but it is a sector which we have to take care for. Now, if you think about the economic side, I always tell to my students there are three things. It's simple about farm income and farm earning capacity. It's very simple. It's actually three things. It's costs, and farmers know how to deal with costs and how to reduce them. It's revenues. Farmers often are dissatisfied about the prices, but that side is clear. But I think also sometimes we think in terms of multifunctionality in revenues from other green services, very important, but in the end it's the market, it's the products, meat and livestock products which you do it. But the important third thing is farm development. Farm development. If you block farm development, you block actually the earning model of the farmers. And that's exactly where we are speaking about today, because it has to do with developing with licenses, with a clear long-term policy scheme so that you know what to do, because it's not only, it are, let's say, limitations with respect to licenses, but it is even more so, I would say, the policy uncertainty in several respects. If you are investing, you don't do it for the 2 years. You need a longer-term perspective. So that's, I think, it means that given that you would like to improve the sustainability, it should happen in this context, and you should take into account these considerations. Sorry. And policy plays a role. That now the concept, if you think about competitiveness, making it economically also viable to let the sector move and to produce it at high standards, there is a concept which has been developed, which is called sustainable competitiveness, so that you not only look to say the narrow monetary things, but that you say, okay, we need a kind of an inclusive growth, but inclusive development. And you see that in the evolution of the competitiveness concept started with a bit as price competitive, as cheap as possible. Then you'll see that quality issues came more in, and nowadays it's also more the externalities and the broader perspectives which come there. So, and that's, I think, should be a guidance concept. But it's important. It's important that, say, if you take that really as the lead to, as the lens to look at things, it's important because that will change your perspective in the sense that it's not only, it's no longer about, say, cheap products, free trade, etc. It's also about, say, taking these other conditions in a balanced way into account so that farmers can compete, including these things, in a good level playing field and be not, say, replaced by imports from which is not adhering to the same standards. Now, an important thing to realize is that there is a double thing here. On the one hand, economy and sustainability go quite well together because it means using less resources for producing things, using less compound feed per kilogram of meat or something like that. That's also from an economic side a good thing to do. But what you see, there is a double thing here. If you are very effective in that, you are a low-cost producer. And what will happen with a low-cost producer? They will, in competition, they will grow, and then you will get a lot more production. It has a low amount of emissions per kilogram, but you are producing still in your area a large number of kilograms, so that the environmental pressure locally. So from a successful strategy, you can have that it doesn't reduce environmental pressure. That's, I think, that the trap the Netherlands was fallen in. So what you should do, you should have clear guidance also with respect to the environmental, what I call the environmental user space. What is the emission space we can use, and then stay within these, say, planetary or boundaries. And you see here in this figure also a small table which refers to a few directives, which each say try to define this user space, but not always in a very good way, I would say. But I think that we should produce to the high standard. We should also try to do it in a good way. Now, let me make a few remarks about the Netherlands and the specific way in which the topic plays a role in my home country. We have actually the issue that we have a very high population density and a very high animal density and wealthy, relatively wealthy people, and that creates a lot of the tension between, say, sustainability and biodiversity and farm profitability. And I already said, since the judges rejected the Dutch policy in 2019, we have about 7 poor years, you could say, in which there is the sector is stalled, which is, of course, a waste. From an economic point, this is a big waste, because farmers have earned reasonable incomes. And what they should do, not pay back loans, not pay back taxes, they should invest and improve and make their farm, say, proof for the future. And that's what not can happen because of the big policy uncertainty. And so I find this from innovative, we have a lot of innovative farmers. I find it really a pity to see this from an economic point of view. And so good policy is a prerequisite, and we should have it as soon as possible. Now, in the Dutch situation, things went off the rails, you could say. And what we need, we have actually what I see as a problem is that when things go not well, policymakers have the tendency to prescribe things. And what you actually see, what happened a bit, is that we get rules on rules on rules on rules, and what you then see is that. Say it's no longer the farmer which is at the steering wheel, but are the policymakers which are at the steering wheel. Now, that cannot become a success. Let's be honest, farming is a profession, and you should respect farmers and in their professionality, and they should have the room to work on that. So I would say we need less prescriptive means measures. We need long-term objectives. In the Netherlands, we are buying out farms at a lot of money. That's only a partial answer. That's not a real answer. The new thing the Dutch government would like to work with is what we call goal steering or target steering. But it's actually kind of a result-based scheme where farmers get actually the targets, and that the government is leaving it to the farmers, saying, okay, you'll have to demonstrate that you are achieving your targets, but you may see the best way how to do this. And I've made, from an economic side, calculations in which I compare this means prescribing way with the target steering way. It could at the farm level make a difference of €15,000 of income. Because if farmers are going to, in their best, look for the best technologies how to do things, yeah, it will be better and also more feasible. We have experiences with antibiotics in the part. We need a good public-private collaboration, but I think a lot is possible there. And there are several practices from the farming sector. I mentioned an example of Arla, La Terre Basse Carbone from France, Low Carbon Dairy in the Netherlands, Focus Planet from Royal Friesland Campina. There are several things the business sector is already taking up in a good way. So I would say, as a policymaker, don't start to repeat and come with your own system, which is just a bit different and adds regulation. Try to more be creative and collaborate with these schemes. Now, with respect to this target steering, let me give you a bit of flavor to that. we distinguish 4 schemes there. The one is that you say, okay, what you'll have in agri-environmental and climate scheme, if it's, for example, about meadow birds, you cannot organize the number of meadow birds in your country, at your land or at your parcel, because you don't have them at a tire. But what you can do is you can provide good conditions, the natural habitat conditions. So you can, and that's a necessary thing, not a sufficient thing maybe, but it is a necessary thing. You don't control predators, so that it can be that you do this good thing and that the meadow birds increase a bit, but not maybe that much. So that's a specific kind there. You would remunerate farmers for making the proper actions. The other thing is that you say if you can really achieve a goal or an emission reduction, but then you have to go to a system of emission reduction and not a deposition. You need to have in your organization of your legislation a good approach. Then you could give farmers a payment or a remuneration for doing. And I think that this incentive, using more incentives to make agriculture more sustainable, is also, I think, the commissioner has announced in his vision that he would like to go in this direction. But the second thing is, of course, to implement it and to think it through, because it's also challenging in terms of, and you can apply this to improve farmer behavior with respect to different farm management actions. But you can also apply this with licenses. And that's now done in the Netherlands for the first 2 times, that the farmer can get a license for a stable. And in that stable, he gets the license to reduce his emissions to a certain extent. And he is free how to do that. But he has to, there are sensors in the stable, so they are securing that he's doing that. But the farmer is left free how to realize that. And it creates, I think, much more possibilities for getting things forward, in particular because if it is about the classification of stables with respect to their emission reduction qualities, this system is quite, I would say, is not well regulated at the moment. So there's a lot of uncertainty there and farmers don't know what to do. You can go with this goal steering further in terms of tradable permits, like you have, for example, phosphate quota system in the Netherlands. I will not go into all the details, but we see that as a more flexible system where you allow the farmer to be at the steering wheel, respect his professionality, make him also responsible, but then make it also clear for him where he stands, what he has to do, and when he is ready. And at the moment, the policy environment is not securing this, which is bad for entrepreneurship. I conclude. So, if I look at the livestock sector broad in Europe, it's not in all member states. I think we are often in a stagnating or declining situation, except for poultry. So the sector is very important from an economic side, but we have serious externality problems, and that's why we have. It's good to legislate and to improve the standard. It's also possible. I think a lot is possible when you do it in a good way, but try to combine improvements, which generally have a tendency to raise costs, with incentives so that farmers are also motivated, get certain freedom, and are incentivized to do the good thing. If you are not doing it, probably you get stuck for years. That's not good for farmers, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for the economy. So let's try to improve on this. And be innovative. It means also that the policy realm should be responsive to the new developments, which technology enables, also to make these sustainability improvements possible. I think the EU has a rich policy environment, but we need to improve its and explore its potential more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Une petite remarque purement technique.
One technical comment. If you turn on your microphone, you'll automatically turn off other people's microphones, so please just bear that in mind.
Voilà. Qui est le petit?
All right. Thank you very much, Professor. The active participation of scientists in our work is truly the hallmark of this intergroup. So a big thanks for your very interesting insights. another hallmark of our intergroup, and I'm very delighted to say this, is that we increasingly have the chance to welcome representatives from DG Environment. I'll now be giving the floor to Madame Claudia Fusco, who is the Director of the Compliance, Governance and Support to Member States Unit at DG Environment of the European Commission. She is in charge of supervising the implementation and the application of EU environmental legislation, the support to member states, as well as governance, environmental governance related questions, and green investments related issues. Madam Fusco, thank you very much for taking the time to take part in our work today, and I'll give you the floor for 15 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, et je vais pas.
Thank you very much.
Really a pleasure for me to be here with you. Also because I'm not an expert on agriculture and farmers, but so I come from DG Environment. I am a director, and behind this maybe cryptic title for you, what does it mean? Governance, compliance, and maybe support to member states. What we try to do, we try to ensure a fair, level playing field for everybody, the respect of the environmental legislation, and to support with the financial instrument, with the multi-annual financial framework, so with the funds which are available at EU level, all actors, including farmers, of course, on the market. So that's this is where I am. I am also a kind of a product of the Commission, if I may say. I've been working for the Commission 25 years in several fields, transport, aviation security, state aid, energy, industrial policy, and others. So, and now over the last 9 years in DG Environment. So my objective today, and it's very interesting because I had thought about telling a number of things, but I would like also to give some replies to the possible extent to some of the questions that have been expressed by the speakers before me. But I want to give you two main messages. The first one is that agriculture and environment go hand in hand. We have to work together, and that's why this group, like the one today, they're super useful for us to exchange views, even agree to disagree, and to see what can we, what can we do together to reach the best compromise. And the second one is to give you an overview, I would say, of where we stand. I'm not covering everything because there is a lot ongoing, but on the main, I would say, policy initiative, legislative and non-legislative initiative that could be interesting for the farmers, for example, for the farming sectors. Just, I think yesterday there was an agri-fish council, and, the ministers, they met and they said, well, we're progressing well. So there was optimism that things that are being done in the EU goes into the right direction. So that's a good starting point. And of course, maybe some indication of what we could do further. And I have some ideas on the fact I think that the farming sector has also to evolve, to develop. And I think I very much rejoin what has been said previously, because I think innovation is not only for the pure technological sectors, but each sector has to develop and to embrace the possibility which are given to us also by technology. Okay, so now I go to the boring part in the sense that I'm trying not to be too long, but I give you this a little bit, this highlight, this overview. So as I mentioned, they go hand in hand, agriculture and environment. This can be said several times. You maybe heard it from also politicians. My Commissioner Roswell, who is responsible for environment, water, resilience, and circular economy. She also said it several times, and she means it. She really means it. Also the President of the Commission, by the way. So it is important that the farmers, they have an ability to produce food, to be competitive, to be resilient, and we have to do this together with the environment because they can benefit to the possible extent on a good environment. In the end, farmers are citizens. I mean, we are all citizens in the end, right? So it is known that agriculture has a strong impact on the environment, not least because 39% of the EU land is is dedicated to agriculture. So, of course, there is an impact. But this doesn't mean that healthy ecosystems are in favor, are supportive of the farming sectors, because by making use of nature-based solutions, by having less soil degradation, by having pollinators do their job, also the production of the farmers will be, because what do we want in the end? Do we want just food or we want healthy food for all of us? And I think that's also where we go together. We are working together towards the same objective. So this is what the Commission tries to do. We know we have various departments. So I come from DG Environment. We have colleagues from DG Agri. We try democratically to listen, of course, to the stakeholders, to have discussions at all levels, and then to try to find the best policy proposals that will go then through the Council to the Parliament and eventually come out as legislation or not. But the vision for agriculture and food was presented last year. Maybe you heard about it, you read it in February last year, and support very much a competitive agri-food system that operates within the planetary boundaries or ecological boundaries, Professor. Let's not forget that the journey had started a bit before, of course, during the Green Deal, a big, for us in the environment, it was like honeymoon period, of course. Don't quote me. But in 2020, we adopted the Nature Restoration Regulation, very strong and also maybe controversial piece of legislation. But one of the objectives of this regulation was exactly to increase agricultural productivity, to reduce food security risks and enhance food resilience. So, and at the time of the impact assessment, it was shown that if we invested €1 in restoring nature, we would have gained between 8 and 38 euros, depending on the ecosystem and on the service, so on the degradation. So I think that economically, and I very much agree with the economy and the fact that the economy has to benefit the whole of the society, and it's very much in our favor. Sustainable livestock is crucial for the EU economy. We know the viability of rural areas, also the preservation of the environment and the rural landscape. And that's why, as mentioned before by the President, the Commission is working also on the livestock strategy, and that should be adopted at the beginning of July. At the same time, we're in June, last month, the Fertilizer Action Plan has been adopted. Why I'm mentioning this? Because while we're trying to look, forward and having what some of you, I think the professor said, we have to have a long-term view and perspective. At the same time, we know all, we are in this geopolitical situation which is super complicated and complex. So with this action plan on fertilizer, we know that the agriculture are suffering because they cannot have access to the fertilizer they need. So we try to find a way to help them to face the current crisis. So we are on one side trying to look, longer term, but we also have to adjust, taking into account the crises that unfortunately are not behind us and are even more complex after COVID, which was already a very strong moment. So we have to handle all this at the same time. So we are working on this also to give replies to the sectors, also in terms of, for example, fertilizers. And that's why there is an exceptional support also on this for the higher cost, increase in the prices of fertilizers, for example. Now, the Commission is also working to better use the Common Agricultural Policy, so the CAP, this was mentioned. I open a little parenthesis. There is a next multi-annual financial framework proposal tabled by the Commission last year in discussions with the Council and with the Parliament, and there is also a very big budget for farmers, for the CAP, a special regulation, and also the national and regional partnership plans will take into account, of course, the regional and the local needs and the national needs through milestones, and that's another point which was made. We have to work towards big objectives that, for example, under Pillar 1 of the next MFF, it gets adopted, then the member states will have to define. So meaning I don't impose to Poland and Italy and Spain the same objectives. The framework is the policy framework, but adapting to each country, because, of course, this is the beauty of our Europe. I keep saying, but I'm a strongly believer, we are united in diversity. We have to keep our diversity. And also in terms of needs, we have to address the different needs in the different areas. So another point, we're also working on digest states. So we want to try to help also with appropriate environmental standards so that the facilitation of use of digest states can be better used. And this will be also linked to the evaluation of the nitrates directive. Nitrates is another big issue for the environment. And based on this evaluation, we will consider what we can achieve maybe more effectively, more efficiently. So we keep the high level of environmental protection, but we try to look at what can be done better. So that's a little bit, I would say, the way I see we are working, but there is much more, because Agri is also doing much more of the part that we're trying to do to support and to adjust. And then there is the simplification. I call it the simplification journey, because this is a journey over the mandate of this commission. Each commissioner has to do the simplification, to stress test our legislation, and we're doing. Commissioner Roswell is doing this with environmental legislation. One of the first results was this environmental omnibus that was tabled last year. This is several volets, several components. I am personally responsible, or I contributed, but it's the work of my colleagues to tell you the truth, to the regulation, the proposal for a regulation on speeding up environmental assessment. And then there are other parts, and I think one other part which is more of interest for you is maybe the industrial emission directives, which has a part for the farmers as well. So simplification is rooted in our action, in our daily action. We're even obsessed about this. Of course, it comes from the Draghi report. It was also reaffirmed by the European leaders this year in March, and Commissioner Roswell is also very much, of course, attached to it and very much strongly believe in it. So we arrived to this environmental omnibus of December last year. Not like that. We had a call for evidence. So there were more than, I think, 200 or 600, I don't remember exactly, contributions coming from stakeholders of different sources. I mean, everybody could, of course, present its views, but Commissioner Roswell also held a specific implementation dialogue with the stakeholders in April last year, where the main outcome was more than we have to try to decarbonize, to ensure energy security. You remember, of course, energy security was already last year as a big problem, but at the same time, we have to secure also high level of protection of the environment and of human health. And it was very much appreciated by some sectors that were presented there, that, for example, the Commission issues a lot of guidance to explain how things could happen in practice, and to explain how the legislation has to be really implemented on the ground. Commissioner Roswell also had other two implementation dialogue, one on permitting for the renewable energy, because I want to stress permitting is a much bigger procedure than the environmental assessment. So not all farmers will need to go, maybe yes, but it depends on the sectors or through environmental assessment. Maybe they have to comply with some other elements that will allow them to receive some authorization, some permits, but could be also national level permits and not decided at EU level. But for sure, what the President mentioned, so the EIA, do you know these acronyms? I hate acronyms. So this environmental implementation assessment and the strategic environmental assessment, the Habitats and Birds Directive, appropriate assessments, and the Water Frame Directives. Of course, these are assessments that need to be done. In some cases, compulsory. It depends if you fall under certain categories. So what we try to do with this omnibus as regards the regulation that we propose, we try at least procedurally to put some simplification, some acceleration. We have identified through the call for evidence and this discussion with stakeholders, because we need the input of the external world. I mean, we are not mastering of the truth in the Commission. We found that there was a need to, for example, to have a single point of contact. As was mentioned before, this is necessary because if you have to ask for a permit and then you have to ask to address in your administration to several part of your administration is already a complication. So this is one on the table for a proposal which is being contested to a certain extent by the member states. I want to be transparent. This morning there was a co-reper, so the ambassador I mentioned are discussing this proposal, but we are trying to give also enough flexibility, again, because it's not from Brussels that we say, oh, you have to do it within 30 days. We give flexibility, range, we take into account of what exists, and of course, if there are in the countries already single contact point, they can be used. So there is no need to contest it. So I said timelines, I said the contact points. There is also, for some strategic sector, we go a little bit beyond. So we consider, for example, overriding public interest. That is something which is already foreseen specifically in the appropriate assessment. It has to be proved. and tacit approval, and some speeding of judicial remedies. So there are a number of, let's say, procedural proposals that can benefit all sectors. So the farmers can benefit from this if we will manage to get, of course, to a legislation. Then I mentioned another point under the omnibus, with this the industrial emission simplification proposal. You know that industrial emission concerns, of course, the farming sector because of the emissions of the activities. There was already a revision, a simplification in 2024. I'm not a super expert on this. This is followed by another colleague of mine. But what I understand is that in this omnibus, there is increased flexibility and simplification. For example, some part of the farmers are not subject anymore to certain of these reporting obligations. Member states can report on behalf of more farmers. So there are proposals that we try to simplify the life of farmers under these proposals. And at the same time, we are also discussing, and my colleagues are discussing also in stakeholders groups, also with the people coming from different perspectives, of course, to try also to establish, what are the main how to get to the results that we want, how to facilitate, for example, the certain elements that they were agreed upon in 2024 under the Industrial Emission Directive. So there is a constant dialogue in how the legislation, once it is approved, can be implemented. And this dialogue allows us as well to maybe find difficulties that we could address through guidance, modification, other things, or maybe through increased support, could be a guidance document, or maybe also financial support. So this is important for you to know that it's not just, I understand it's very difficult because when I go to my country and I speak to the people in the street, and of course we are very far away, but there is a constant discussion. Of course, we cannot discuss with every single citizen, but there are youth citizens, for example, now dialogues that we're also doing just to make sure that we don't lose the content with the reality. So these are mainly the points that I wanted to highlight, but I wanted to give another piece of information on the stress testing, on the Habitat and Birds directives, because in the omnibus we don't touch. There is one article in one of the proposals on the speeding up environmental assessment concerning the residual killing of some specimen of birds. But we will be stress testing this legislation towards 2026. Some targeted consultation have already taken place. There is an ongoing public consultation closing on the 10th of August. Please have a look. If you have things to say, please do. We value your opinion. And then towards the end of the year, there will be an assessment if there are things to be changed, to be made more efficient, more simplified. This is something that we will look into very carefully. And at the same time, also on the Water Framework Directive, this was also an announcement, a political announcement last year. We're also going through this process of looking at the revision of the Water Framework Directive, always bearing in mind the simplification, the efficiency, while keeping the high level of standard for the environment and for human health. So to conclude, I want to say another things on the next multi-annual financial framework, because the CAP was mentioned. Again, I'm not an super expert of the CAP and how it works, the schemes. What we try to do in the proposal is to simplify again the life of especially of the small farmers, to still ensure that there is an income which is assured for the farmers. At the same time, we want to incentivize farmers to go a step forward, so to embrace sustainability. So those who do more, they will get additional budget, additional incentives according to the current proposal. So because the evolving means also that embracing and be also front runners. And maybe one day, but that's another thing which is a little bit more in the long run, you heard about maybe the nature credits. There was a communication and roadmap last year. So we are trying also to think, how can we make some of these good practices tradable, like it is done now for the ETS, for the emissions, maybe also for nature. So this would be also a way to further reward those farmers who are already doing something for nature when working on their own field, in their own field. And it's very important because, let's say, in addition to the CAP and to the links with the national regional partnership plans, but there is also a strong link of agriculture in the Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is the European Competitiveness Fund, so with competitiveness. And in fact, one of the windows, there are several windows, I don't know if you want to know about this. One is dedicated to health, biotech, agriculture, and bioeconomy. This means that also agriculture is being looked at from the perspective of competitiveness, and also to have, and this for me means also that also the agriculture sectors can also evolve positively for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the society as a whole. So for me, to conclude, I would say the three things I said in the beginning. First of all, farmers are key allies for us, for the environment, I would say. Really, I'm very much interested in listening to you and to hear about your concerns. They are key to solve the environmental challenges that we are facing, because they are working on the ground, on the land. So they're really those who can make the difference. We are also confident that agriculture can also support and become more competitive, and they have to embrace innovation. And I think that those who become more sustainable, in the long run, this will pay off in terms of production, quality, quantity and market, because we are going to support this shift and continue supporting this shift. And also the President said that the objective of the Green Deal are there. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Fusco.
Thank you very much, Madame Fusco, for this presentation. And to conclude this first panel on setting the scene, we will be giving the floor to Madame Carol Hernandez, who is an expert in environmental law and a particular expert on European environmental legislation, its application and its implications for the different economic sectors. Madame Hernandez. Thank you, Chairman. 15 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm here today because I wrote a memo, the judicialization of food and farming projects. It is available just outside the room. So I wrote this for a think tank called the Omnivores, Les Omnivores. So the topic is judicialization, i.e. understanding how a judge, or all judges in reality, be they administrative or a civilian judge, how they're redesigning the capacity of production. So I'll be focusing on the French context because I'm French and I developed a study on what's happening in France. But as you will see, we'll be talking about European law as well. And the idea is to show how judges take part in drafting legislation and how they take part in creating law.
Le diaporama, c'est moi.
Should I move on to the next slides myself? There we go. I'll first introduce myself. I'm a legal expert, no one's perfect, and on top of that, I'm French. So I'm far from being perfect, as you can imagine. I'll do my best, though. So why am I saying this? Because for about 30 solid years, I have been working for the farming world, but I've only been using environmental law to do this. I work on topics such as water, fertilizers, PPPs, livestock farming, biodiversity, the climate, and so on. So I always say I talk to farmers, I work for farmers with the environmental legislation. Yes, this is absolutely possible, and I'll show you why. Very briefly, my background. Once upon a time, we're back in 1992. I started studying environmental law in Paris, and I had prominent law professors who were creating environmental law and who are very interested in environmental law. And they told me environmental law, or law generally, is a weapon. And when you know how to use law as a weapon, it can change a society. It can change a society's values. And it can also change an entire sector, such as that of farming. This is what I was taught during my studies. I presented my thesis in 1997. It was titled The Influence of Environmental Law on Rural Law. The idea was to demonstrate that the beginning of integrating environmental requirements into the CAP would have farming activities evolve. So back then, a lot of people laughed at me, actually, because everyone was telling me, this is never going to happen. It's just not possible. Nevertheless, all the principles were there, especially the principle of sustainable development, which is an integration principle. The requirements in terms of environmental law need to be integrated in all other policies. However, this was a time when the issue of the environment was not really prominent, especially in the face of the economic and farming activities happening back then. So this was my starting point. And I finished my thesis by saying agriculture serves the general interest as soon as it protects the environment, because back then, protecting the environment in the French law served the general interest in 1976. I continued working and trained for 10 years, and I noticed that environmental law was becoming stronger and stronger. So I was training for 10 years in the farming world, and that's when the nitrate and Natura 2000 directives were gaining in prominence and were having an influence on production factors. I then worked for the agricultural chambers and public establishments and administrative establishments, and I was able to take part in major open multi-party political debates on the environment called the Grenelle de l'Environnement in 2007. Indeed, back then, our president brought together all actors from the environmental sector, unions, NGOs, and so on. The list goes on. This was a crucial conference because this is when I understood that agriculture is all about the environment, because we were having discussions on water, nitrates, pesticides, and so on. And it was also a time when I understood that there were no legal experts to draft environmental law, because this major environmental conference generated legislation. So the law was not written by legal experts, which says a lot, and I'll come back to this later. And then I understood the strengths of administrations and of associations to draft environmental law, because especially when it comes to environmental protection associations, they work with legal experts and they hire legal experts. I then moved on to work for a think tank, and I was working on the legal status of animals. Here again, I understood the power of words and the power of ideas and the power of the law in order to completely transform a sector, because from that moment onwards, a law was adopted in France in 2014, saying that animals would become a sentient being. A being meaning that it's something that moves, which is not stuck to the ground. Animals move. I left this think tank and started working for farming cooperatives, and I saw a watershed moment in the establishment and creation of this law, because the EGalim law was then created, and it specifically focused on fertilizers. And here again, I understood that all of these farming aspects were part of a general thinking process about the environment, and was all part of environmental law. I left the world of cooperatives and then became a freelance consultant. What I did not tell you is that during all those years, I met many judges and met them again. And these judges gradually seized this major legal topic about the environment in order to interpret it and to create law, because judges create law. And I'm going to explain to you how. Not long ago, I met the representatives of the association Les Omnivores, and with the help of a think tank which focuses mainly on livestock farming in France, we asked the following questions. Basically, livestock farmers noticed that there are increasing disputes about livestock farming, and we wondered whether this was actually the case, and if so, what was at stake. not just for the livestock farmers, but also for water resources, the climate, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, I can't cover all of this right now, but everything is linked. Don't believe that legal experts and legislation works in silos. Everything is linked. But for this project, I was mainly focusing on livestock farming. So here's the brief I wrote about this topic. It wasn't really easy to draft, actually, because the topic itself is quite extensive. I first mapped the disputes, meaning I identified the decisions, legal decisions and decrees that were the most interesting or the most important, or say the most representative of how the legal system was working. And I also looked at disputes, which helped me to understand how these disputes were happening. When, how does the judge intervene? When is he called upon? And so on. And who are the claimants? And we'll see that for the claimants, we also have quite a few interesting observations to show. That was the first part. Second part, I drew the teachings of all of this. And then in the third part, I presented some proposals. Let's take the example of the livestock sector. When it comes to the livestock sector, what we can identify in terms of disputes that have existed for many years is that first, we notice that these are sort of traditional disputes, classical neighborhood disputes. For example, a neighbor is unhappy because the rooster is singing at 6 a.m. or because he can hear the bells from the cows or because there's specific smells. And so they turn to judges, and this has been happening for many years. It's important to note that in French law, this is a mechanism which is based on case law. Since 1844, so it's been quite a while. This mechanism has been codified 2 years ago, and it's been made into legislation. The idea is to say here that in the real world there are normal sounds which one has to accept. There are noises, there are nuisances, however, which are not normal. And in those cases, indeed, even if the livestock farmers is in full compliance with the legislation, from the moment onwards where there are prejudices which are deemed abnormal by the judge, in that case, reparations can be granted to the claimant. It's important to note that over time, and this comes back to what was being said earlier on, well, there's a growing number of disputes, but I would also say there's a growing fear of having disputes among livestock farmers, meaning some livestock farmers do not file a complaint, or, for example, rather, they do not file a request to extend their farm, for example, because they're afraid of how their neighbors are going to react. French legislation seeks to protect farmers who are starting out a new farm. It's a principle. So basically, if the farm was there before the neighbor moved next door, the farmer is protected. So the legislation says that to make sure that farmers are not accused of abnormal noise or nuisances, for example, they should be able to continue their activity without any changes, even though some changes were made in the favor of animal welfare. It took 2 years for this law to be implemented. There is an exemption for farmers. The farmer has to have arrived first. They need to respect the legislation. However, they can change their farming practice or their activity as long as it's not in a substantial way. Who decides what they mean by substantial? The judge, meaning we will keep having disputes in the future. Another type of dispute we see quite often as well are attacks against so-called permits, i.e. administrative authorizations. This means that, for example, a farmer receives a permit in order to start their livestock farm or to extend it, and then claimants go to a judge in order to go against the giving of those permits. In Brittany, for example, we've seen that some associations now specialize in legal remedies, and this is in their statutes. This is fully transparent. They say it clearly. The way in which they proceed, or basically the heart of their business, is disputes. And some associations work, for example, with donors, with donations. This type of dispute is quite interesting because what does it show? Basically, when associations they work on improper claims, for example, because, for example, the association in Brittany has very competent legal experts. They're very competent and they can demonstrate, for example, that an impact study was insufficient because it doesn't take into account this factor, that factor. But in reality, things are so technical and so complex that there's always something that doesn't function in an impact study compared to what happens in reality. We're talking here about livestock farms, and France have different regions. It is affected by the Natura 2000 directive, the nitrates directive, and so on. And therefore, the judges have to decide whether the livestock farming is not going to damage a certain region which is sensitive or protected, or which is more sensitive ecologically speaking, such as coastlines. And when European law aims to protect the good state of the water resources and biodiversity and so on, it can have an impact on specific economic activities. So judges create the law, but in fact they are also in charge of interpreting the law because they are there to appreciate situations and scientific data. I'll come back to this later. Then we have a second type of dispute which affects livestock farming as well. These disputes are much broader, and they focus more on the responsibility of the state, the absence of the state in the implementation. Well, first of all, when it comes to climate change, the absence of implementing, for example, measures to reduce greenhouse gases. Why do I use this example? Because legally speaking, the legal construction explains what happens in nitrate-related disputes, for example, or disputes related to green algae. In France, the state was convicted for prejudice to the environment, causing a prejudice to the environment, and the state was sanctioned for this. We have an association in France from Brittany who sued the state for not respecting the nitrates directive in Brittany. And the courts very recently have just given their ruling, and this association won. And as a result, the state has a few months to amend the regulation applicable to livestock farms. So basically, the French state needs to ensure that nitrates coming from the farming sector are reduced. Now, third type of dispute, and this type of dispute is even more striking because this is more an issue linked to activism. It's linked to political choices made by the French government. And these activists are basically going against these choices. And I'm referring to Article 2 of our Declaration of Human Rights from 1789, which stipulates that we enjoy the freedom of resisting to oppression. And today, for those activists, resisting to oppression means resisting to this type of agriculture which is very focused on production. So, for example, mega farms and so on and so forth. For them, it's important to resist this agriculture which is supported by a state which actually is complicit with the big polluters. And so this basically takes us to another field of action, which is more in the political realm. And so basically we come down to this question between capitalism and another political choice, which would be on the other end, basically. And there are many examples in the case law. For example, there's a ruling on about an association which trespassed into a farm without asking for the permission of the farmer. They made videos and posted pictures of the farm on social network, and this lasted for years. And only very recently, the French court said that entering onto a farm without their authorization is a property right violation, and this ought to be sanctioned. But here again, the court in France renders rulings on different events, which can differ depending on what happened. And then it had to basically make a choice between one association which was invoking its rights, its freedom of expression and animal welfare, and on the other hand, the farmers who were invoking their right to property and the protecting basically the cleanliness of their farms. So basically, the courts had to make a choice. What's important is that basically nowadays judges are making choices instead of politicians, and I'll come back to this later. So what can we draw from all this? It's important to take into account the dynamics in the judicialization here, basically resorting to a judge so that they can intervene in disputes which usually are well thought through. They are systemic and organized by structures which are there to go against a model and which take advantage about the environmental law, which is so complex and which is so open to interpretation as well. When you draft legislation for future generations, you can imagine how a judge might interpret it. And those specific associations are taking advantage of these, of the weakness or maybe the strength of the environmental law in order to go against a model. This is what we call the lawfare technique, basically weaponizing law. Using standards and procedures or legal institutions in order to impose their willingness, put pressure, or change the power dynamics. And here again, and I'm not teaching you anything here, you can simply follow the disputes and look at the press releases and see what's happening on the websites of all these associations to understand how they function, because they take pride in all of this. And sorry, but I have to say this, they position themselves on the side of the right regarding the farmers rather than on the state, which according to them is in the wrong, because they are going against basically bad farming. These claimants are very well organized, very well structured. They know everything about law, and they are fighting against a sector or type of activity which they do not accept as such. And they have lawyers, law professors, philosophy professors, and so on, and they are supported financially by the citizens. So basically, the judge, in these cases, is used as a tool in order to change the law in favor of the claimants. Because France is a country where law changes, especially when there's a lot of pressure from all these disputes. And in the end, this really disrupts the hierarchy of the standards in France, because in France we have, the Constitution, international agreements, and so on. And we can clearly see in these cases that a judge, which is supposed to merely interpret a legislation, is intervening in creating environmental law. So how come judges are able to do this? Because, as I said, law is complex, it's not always straightforward, and also there's a specific intent or intention. And this raises questions when it comes to the rule of law. Sometimes, when legislation or law is created, some would say, well, we don't exactly know what we're doing, but the judge will tell us. And this is dangerous for the rule of law, which usually rests on a balance between the checks and balances, basically the executive, legislative, and judicial powers. So what are the next leads? You talked about simplifying the law. Yes, that is a good idea, but it is largely insufficient. I.e., if we simplify the law without changing its intent, we won't be changing much. And in reality, it's important to focus, or basically we have to have in mind, we have to know what we want to draft so that the judge does not interpret the law at his own discretion. The more precise the law is, the less the judge can interpret at his own discretion, and the fewer disputes we will have. So what I'm saying here is that it's important to have a better balance. As you all have understood, when I started my career, the environment was not at all part of economic policies. And as time went by, we now have an environmental urgency which takes pride of place over the economic aspects. So what we have in French legislation today is that protecting agriculture and the interest of the general public will help us balance agriculture and the environment. The idea is not to know who's going to win, who's going to lose. But if we want to have a certain balance in the economic world, we need to have some balance in the legal world as well. And so this raises the question, what to do with this constitution, the French constitution, but I think that in EU law, it's important to protecting farming and livestock farming in order to reestablish this balance. And I'll conclude by saying that some environmental impact studies have been done showing the impacts of specific projects on the environment. It's important to think about the impact of environmental projects on the economy in order to, again, strike a balance. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hernandez, and thank you also to my colleagues from the Parliament who are taking part in this work. There are two requests for the floor, Madam from the Commission and Jessica. Yes, Jessica, go ahead. Jessica Lowe is a member of the Parliament, and unfortunately we can't hear the chairman anymore.
Also.
See, now it works again. Is it working? Yes. Sorry. The Farmer Citizens Movement in the Netherlands, so a political party that was funded on defending the rights of people living in rural areas and agricultural producers. So I would like to thank very much the Intergroup for organizing this discussion, and I would like to compliment all the speakers because this has been a tremendous amount of information in a very short time frame. Thank you so much. I apologize, Professor Jongeneel, for arriving late, but I do want to thank you for the message that you gave us, that we should not be putting top-down policies over our agricultural sector. We need to set the goals. We may even be strict on the goals, but we need to let them free and need the entrepreneurship flow to be able to reach those goals. So thank you for that. I'm very much in line with your way of thinking. Then, Madame Hernandez, I would like to congratulate you because what you just showed us with an enormous amount of information in a short time frame is what we're also seeing in the Netherlands. We're seeing in the Netherlands that the let's say, how you call it, justice is taken over by, or strongly influenced by, an ideology. And that makes it very difficult. It makes it also very sad because honestly, while we were busy working and producing food for everybody else, the NGOs got very strong and were very well equipped and in that sense did it very smartly, but we are left with the collateral damage now. And I would very much like to pick up the discussion later with you and some other day invite you to come for a talk, because we still have to fix this. I'm not sure if we can fix it in the Netherlands, to be honest, but we can still save livestock farming in Europe. And then, Madame Fusco, I'm very happy with all the information. Tremendous speaker, a lot of information. Something that really triggered me is you mentioned that the nature restoration laws, one of its main objectives was to increase productivity. And then I would very much like to ask you if you can explain, maybe there's no time now, but at another moment, how is the nature restoration law ever contributing to increasing productivity on farm? And if you also mentioned to the member states that this was the objective, because I can tell you that the implementation of the nature restoration law in the Netherlands is killing livestock farming in the Netherlands. So I'm very curious how that works. And you mentioned that sustainability will be beneficial in the end. Do you agree with me that the definition of sustainable is to have the smallest environmental impact with the highest amount of protein produced? So if you have per kilogram the lowest environmental impact, that we call that sustainable? Or do you believe sustainable is extensification with a very low protein output? That would be my question for you. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Jessica. Madame, vous vouliez déjà réagir par rapport au speech précédent, et maintenant vous avez une question de Jessica. Donc, je vous cède.
Unfortunately, we can't hear the speaker. Don't forget to turn on your mic. Mic, please.
React on the interesting presentation from Madame Hernandez. I am also a legal expert, of course, not as expert as you on France, and it's a bit worrying, I would say, even what you expressed, that there is this kind of abuse of powers. I would just recall that every judge across Europe, if there is an issue on interpretation of the EU law, can always refer the matter to the Court of Justice that will give, let's say, the interpretation, so they will not create. So I think that the role of the judges is they participate certainly to the interpretation, but I found it very, very strong. And I trust you. I hope this is not the case, maybe across Europe, to the fact that there is even a reverse interpretation or who's making the law. Because on one side, I think we are asked to do legislation which is not too prescriptive, not too simplified, etc. But at the same time, you say, well, if you are not prescriptive enough, then the judges have freedom. I would assume that the judges will have always, each of us has to follow the law. And of course, I know that the legislation is put forward by political objectives. This is not, let's not be naive, so it depends on what you believe. I also believe that in democracy, there is a possibility also to express a different opinion, and that's why I'm also expressing myself now, à titre personnel, I would say, in a different way. But what is important is that there is, at least for the European law, there is a possibility of referral to the Court of Justice that can interpret the law, and can help also the national judges to better interpret. And maybe it's interesting to notice that in the proposal for the regulation of environmental assessment, there is this preclosure that is allowed to those member states that can use it, that would exactly address what you were saying, that some maybe parties are abusing the system. So if this happens, there is a possibility, if this goes through, to maybe reduce this kind of abuse. So what I mentioned with with nature restoration regulation, of course, is it's publicly available. That one of the objectives is also to support agriculture sector, but the way it is. We see it is on what I said also overall, all along my speech, I would say, is that if agriculture develops, it becomes more sustainable, embraces nature restoration and also the nature-based solution that can better also, they can benefit also in terms of their production. So this is what I mean. Of course, these are not the main objectives, but if you go also online, you will find that one of the objectives of the nature restoration is also to favor also of agriculture, because I strongly believe that agriculture and environment, they go together. We are not antagonists. I don't believe in this, really. I think we have to stop thinking about that, because otherwise we just put ourselves in the defensive. I'm on the right side, you're on the wrong side, and the way around, and we cannot get to where we want to get. So I think it is extremely important to understand each other. And if you say in the Netherlands nature restoration is killing, then the Netherlands will come. They will have to discuss on the nature restoration plans. Some of the member states are already notified, because normally they have to do this by September of this year. I know that my colleagues are discussing with the member states to understand what are the difficulties. And as I mentioned, we are there to listen and to try to. We have, of course, the objective in mind, which are enshrined in law. So we are not just changing the law. The law is there. But we are happy to provide support and to help. But let's not, I mean, I'm very much somebody who is outside the antagonism way of working. We have to work together. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot about that. I cannot reply for the simple, because there is no sustainability, let's say, not even green definition according to the EU law. So I cannot tell you if what the proteins, etc. What I can tell you is that for it's always, and in some cases it's a matter also of a balancing interest. But again, this doesn't mean that one loses and one wins. For me, this is very clear. And even Nature 2000, for example, sites, economic activities are possible. They are possible. Otherwise, we would have no economic activities, basically, because the network is quite big. So we have really to try to understand what are the limits. And if we go a little bit more granular and a little bit beyond the general principle, that's why I'm saying let's not become antagonists. There are a lot of things that can be done, but I cannot tell you because we don't have it, sustainability definition in the EU.
Oui. Sorry.
Sustainability is the buzzword of the Commission. Right? So it's sustainable, sustainable, sustainable. I ask you, what is then the definition of sustainable? You cannot give it to me, while it's being used in pretty much every paragraph that the Commission writes. That is interesting.
What I'm saying is that to my knowledge, there is no definition of sustainability in EU law.
Je pense vraiment que c'est.
I really think that this is an incredibly important question, because all political choices would stem from this definition, and I believe that the definition is linked. There's a ratio between price and emissions, and I believe this is the right way to go, because if we don't go into that direction, we will replace European products by imported products. And yes, I'm sorry.
Expert on agricultural law. So I want this to be clear, because otherwise you will say, the Commission is telling. So I don't know, but what I know, if there are in certain legislation, there are limits mentioned. So I'm sure there will be, or I will take note and I will come back to you with the reply. I think it is better, because otherwise I risk giving wrong messages, especially because, for example, I know that there are some, like we say in nitrates, there are certain limits. Yeah. And this, of course, we use these limits to address and to decide what can be done and what cannot be done. So there are certain parameters. It's not that we know nothing. But most probably, I don't know, so I admit this, and I will take note and I will come back to you.
Very good. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your active participation, because these are crucial questions, and us communicating, having a dialogue, will help us to go forward. Thank you very much. So we're now going to close the first panel. So I'm going to ask to the members of the second panel to join us here at the table. So maybe we could switch seats. And then we will start the second panel. I'm going to give the floor to Miss Lut Dont, who's a livestock farmer. She raises cows, milk cows, dairy cows, sorry, in Belgium. She was also the chairwoman of the Boerenbond, the main Flemish agricultural organization in Belgium. Thank you very much for being here, and you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Peut-être que
Maybe the others can come up as well.
Jessica. Voilà, madame. Si vous poussez...
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lut Dont. I'm a dairy farmer, but I'm also Vice President of Boerenbond, the Belgian Farmers Union. And I'm pleased to speak about the permitting issue our agricultural sector in Flanders is facing. Okay. I'm doing so not only in my official capacity, but also because many farmers today do not feel comfortable speaking out publicly about their activities and the legal certainty they so desperately need. The barriers to speaking out is high. All too often, those who do speak out take the risk of being seen as a target for additional checks, legal action, or procedures. That is precisely why it is so important that we also present this case collectively. The reality in Flanders is that, for many businesses, obtaining a permit is no longer a routine step in a company's development, but has become a structural source of uncertainty. This affects businesses in various ways. Our Flemish farms want to invest and develop further to become more sustainable and resilient to external shocks, but they are hampered by uncertainty. For many of them, it is also about sustainable innovation and technology, and even there, things come to a standstill. Projects struggle to obtain permits or get bogged down. Generational renewal is also coming under pressure, as young farmers see no future for a business that lacks legal certainty. Only 1 in 8 farmers in Flanders expects to have a successor. I give you an example. Did you know that in Flanders today, over 40 farm-scale biogas plants are ready to be built, but farmers do not dare to renew their permits because of fears that all previous approved projects and permits will be called into question. The sector is thus being pushed into a standstill, simply by the fear of the outcome of a permit application. I have another example. A young farmer in my neighborhood took over the farm 6 years ago. Due to the uncertainty following the legal challenge of the Flemish implementation of the Habit Directive, he was unable to obtain a permit in time. Despite the cost already incurred in the application, an extra 10,000 euros for an appropriate assessment on top of the investment and other application costs. The decisions resulting from subsequent cause law now force him to choose between 2 options: shut down the farm due to a lack of development opportunities, or opting for a new permit involving very expensive techniques for which he has no certainty whatsoever that the legal base will still be in place in the future. We must all realize that the choice this young farmer faces is not limited to Flanders, but applies across the whole of the EU, and that his decision has a direct impact on not only on our food security within the next 20 years, but also on all future generations after him. The young farmer recently had a baby son, who might once follow his father into agriculture. This cannot and must not be the intention of environmental legislation and the consequences of the case law surrounding it. The need for investment in the sector is thus offset by very high costs and a highly uncertain procedure and outcome. Running and developing a business in this way requires specialist advice, additional studies, and legal guidance. Moreover, the outcome is difficult to predict. Even when a permit is granted, it remains vulnerable to legal proceedings, or the national framework itself may be challenged over and over again. After all, how can one prove the negative? We have to demonstrate that we have no significant impact on the environment following the Habitat Directive. But how do you prove something that does not exist? This is virtually impossible and places the burden of proof on the farmer and his family. And with scientific certainty, such a thing does not exist. In legal proceedings, they try to undermine everything at every turn. In practice, this often leads to a standstill. Investments are postponed, businesses adapt a wait-and-see approach, and the sector loses momentum. This runs counter to the ambitions regarding simplification, generational renewal, decarbonization, and the reduction of emissions. It creates trade-off between environmental objectives itself and exacerbates the polarization between environmental and economic goals, something we as farmers do not want. In this way, we risk the entire EU becoming caught up in a carousel of standstill, court rulings, the undermining of national implementation frameworks, and legal uncertainty. This only reinforces the downward spiral our sector is currently in, and we need to break out of it. The question then is, why is this the case? The root of the problem does not lie solely with Flanders, but primarily within European legislation and the way in which it is interpreted by the court. We in Flanders are nothing more than the canary in the coal mine. European directives are enforced very strictly by the courts, leaving little to no scope for proportionality or socio-economic consideration. There are plenty of examples in the agriculture sector, but also across industry as a whole and even in housing. A painful example of this is the systematic use of the no interioration principle, Article 6, to subordinate economic activities. Everyone will understand that the use of systematic litigation based on the Habitat Directive, the Bird Directive, the Water Framework Directive, and soon the Nature Restoration Regulation could occur anywhere in Europe, in the European Union, and create a similar situation, all based on the same articles in EU legislation and following court rulings. We have also experienced this uncertainty firsthand on our own farm. Our farm is situated near the Belgian coast. The farm has been in the family for over 200 years. We keep 170 dairy cows, having expanded from 80 to 170 over the past generation. We did so in balance with the available land for fodder and manure disposal. At the start of 2021, our son was ready to keep over the family farm. In February of this year, the famous nitrogen ruling was handed down in Flanders, following a European court decision. We had to wait more than a year to apply for an environmental permit. We had to adjust our original plans. Instead of increasing the number of cows to be able to farm with 2 families, we applied for the status quo. Subject to an additional investment for more than 12,000 euros for a manure robot, the result is a confirmation of the original permit, but this must now support 2 families financially. Under these circumstances, a gradual generational renewal and the long-term sustainability of the family farm are very difficult to maintain. For a family business, this weighs particularly heavy. It is not just about an investment, but about intergenerational cooperation and future plans that are becoming and remain uncertain. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are asking for today is not scaling back of targets. What we are asking for is a workable, feasible and legally certain framework in which investment, innovation and succession become possible once again. Our farmers want to become more sustainable, but they need legal certainty, scope for development and investment, and a feasible timetable. This is no longer just our issue. This is no longer just a problem in Flanders. It is becoming increasingly coming across member states. We should be aware of these developments. We call for the political courage to make decisive adjustments to what has gone wrong in European environmental legislation and to commit to the future of a receiving EU. We are going to need it. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Dont, pour le bel exposé.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dond, for your interesting presentation. I'm now going to give the floor to Mr. Grzegorz Bodziak, who's a pig farmer from Poland and who is the president of the board of Good Valley Agro SA. Thank you very much for being here with us. You have 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share my insights with you. As said, I represent the large producers, agri-producers in Poland, including pig producers. But as a child, I remember I used to help my father, who kept, back in the 80s, 2 pigs, 10 chickens, 15 rabbits, maybe a cow now and again. So I remember this small farming as well. Before I start sharing my insights with you, let me come back shortly to the discussion about the definition of sustainability. Already several years ago, when we started the debate on sustainability, I remember one scientist saying that trying to define sustainability is something like trying to attach pudding to a wall using a hammer and a nail. And maybe this reflects and explains what we are dealing with today, and I share very much his definition. Let me start with very concrete examples from Poland and then go over to some general conclusions. This couple of brothers, they started to apply for permission to build or expand an existing farm from 50 to 150 sows back in 2014. They complied with all the rules. They got the rulings in favor of their case. Finally, until today, they haven't received even the environmental permit. So today, as I know, they are suing the municipal authority to get compensation for the difference of cost of this expansion between 2014 and today, amounting to 280 million euro. But this is showing, not getting into detail, how lengthy and how difficult procedures we are facing. Another example connected to the so-called nuisance done by rural activity or farming activity is Szymon Kluka. These two are public examples, so I present the names. He was accused of being a nuisance by the neighbors, the others, and the noise. And he was sentenced back in 2023 to pay a compensation, 28,000 euro, and he was imposed some extra restrictions on his activity. And the rulings by the court have been not in favor in his case until today. He's completely discouraged from any other attempt to improve, to expand, to do anything better for his farm. One example of a large project which represents my company is a large farm which we tried to rebuild and expand from 2,000 sows in full cycle into 6,000 sows with piglets only, to specialize in piglets. As you might know, there is a challenge in Poland where we import 8 million piglets from abroad yearly, so we want to re-establish our own production, which we used to have many years ago. It's not being blocked firmly, it's not being stopped yet. I do hope it will continue, but we see a very strong delay in the proceedings, and we are really afraid of this lengthy procedure, which might take years. I remember, just to mention, back in 2005, when we built our first biogas plant, it was the first biogas plant in Poland, it took us exactly 7 months from applying for the permission until we get the permission. 7 months, a dream. The question is, what has happened to the system? And one very special example, also from my company, biosecurity improvement. As you know, Poland is very much impacted by ASF, African swine fever, so any biosecurity measure is very welcome. So-called disinfecting gate, we applied for by putting a notification, which should be enough for a local authority, but some of the local authorities, they choose to be more requiring, and one of them required a building permit. It took us 3 months to convince, using the legal arguments, that it's not necessary. But the delay of 3 months in this respect, in this context, might be very crucial, taking into account the risks by African swine fever. So we're talking about different ambiguous approaches by regional authorities, which might be the case in other European countries. And one concrete case again, there is a big Polish integrator running a project where they involve small farmers into the model of keeping finisher pigs just under the limit of IPPC permit, so up to 2,000 finisher pigs per farm. But they have decided to go beyond the current standard of animal welfare, and they have proposed to the farmers to use 0.8 square meters per pig, which has given a reason for some NGOs to claim that this is an attempt to obey and go around the limit defined by IPPC. In the result, there are cases, one in court, there is one in local government appeals board, and there are some cases delayed. Again, an example showing that a will and attempt to improve the standards meets bureaucracy and actions against it by some NGOs. So what we experience probably also in some other member countries is so-called gold plating. One of the most painful for the big producers in Poland is this special regulation since 2004 requiring pig farmers keeping pigs and poultry, for this example, the pigs, to have or lease, own or lease 70% of land needed for distribution of manure. And this is often difficult because you normally would have neighbors who are not willing to lease land to you or sell, but you might very well spread the slurry and utilize the manure in the best possible way. So it is counterproductive and should be changed in our eyes. And a very big challenge for Polish agriculture development are the new local development plans and the obligation to comply with them until the end of August. They should be adopted in all the communes. But in most cases, the communes are really restricting the possibilities to build new farms, expand existing farms, or even build infrastructure which is environmentally friendly or climate friendly, like biogas plants in connection with the farms. And not a good trend. We are trying to do something about it. It's a challenge. One very positive example which I would like to share with you is the legislative initiative about making it possible for farmers to do activities as they should be allowed to by law. And this is very similar to the French law that was mentioned today already about protection of agriculture and farming function in the countryside. The background, you know, all of you, just to mention that in Poland we have 40% of people living in the countryside, but only 8% producing in agriculture as active farmers. In Europe, the average, as I remember, is 25% living in the country and lower even than 8% producing. And the Act, you will have a chance to read the details later in the presentation, but just to mention, it's about specifying that agricultural activities within the scope of normal use of property, as a general rule, should be regarded as causing undue nuisance to neighbors, and this should be written in the civil code. One more amendment is about code of misdemeanors, where we exclude criminal liability in case the activity is run in a proper way. And the last one intended to be changed is the amendment of the Act of the Development of the Agricultural System, stipulating that the people who want to move into the countryside shall sign into the notarial deed that they are aware of, agree with the normal nuisance or effect of farming activity, because it has been there before and they are coming as a nuance, to put it simply. It's on the public consultation, and let's see what happens to that in the coming weeks and months. Two last slides, concluding remarks. From our parliamentary group for protection of and development of Polish agriculture production, meeting in June this year, the farmers expect shortening the time to taken to issue environmental decisions. We discussed it today already. Reducing protracted proceedings, so excessive length of proceedings. Simplifying administrative procedures, because we do not want to avoid implementing new standards and transforming into more environmental friendly systems, but we just need a level playing field and understanding in the dialogue based on scientific facts and practice. Stable, predictable legislation, also mentioned today. We need a perspective, especially in the context of the demographic challenge we have across Europe, with next generation not wanting to take over farming activities. So we need to encourage them and show there is a good perspective in taking this job. Effective protection of agricultural land against uncontrolled development, and clear rules on the siting of agricultural investments. And one last slide with conclusions. So regulations securing protection of agricultural production functions, just the first and necessary step, because it's kind of getting legalized, something which should be legal. But okay, let's get it in place. But the next step should be regulations facilitating the construction of new farms, expansion, improving, and adopting to the new standards. We should avoid over-implementation, so-called gold plating, and stick to the real necessary and rational solutions. We should have better ex-ante cumulative impact analysis of implementation of new legislation. This is, I think, very relevant for all legislation, both on the European level, but also on country levels. And remember, profitability is an integral part of sustainability. We come back to the definition, and we should not forget that education and building public awareness about these aspects are crucial. Remembering that poop is part of the loop when we talk about livestock, and that livestock farming is part of the environmental solution, not the problem. I have one last one. We want all to live healthy lives, but in the first place, we should remember not to die from hunger. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Moi, je me rends compte que
Thank you very much, sir. Wow, it seems like time is flying by, so we're going to have to hurry up a little bit. I'll now ask the next speakers to stay brief as they take the floor. Mr. Topsik is, Madam Topsik is here, and she is in charge of poultry production at the Skupina Pivka group. In close collaboration with livestock farmers and production partners, she focuses on animal well-being, biosafety, the performance of the production, and sustainable development all along the poultry value chain. Madam Tomczyk, thank you very much for being here. You also have 10 minutes. Those are 10 small minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm grateful for the opportunity to present our situation and a concrete case from our company. My name is Maja Tomčić, as already mentioned, and I'm responsible for our company's poultry production. As already mentioned, in my work I center on supporting sustainable and welfare-friendly farming practices while ensuring that farms and farmers consequently can continue to operate successfully and remain economically viable. Before I continue with my presentation on the challenges facing poultry farming in Slovenia especially those related to environmental permitting, let me provide some context on the realities faced by farmers and companies in my region. Pivka de la Maris Group is located in a small country. However, we are the second largest poultry producers in Slovenia. We are also part of one of the largest food production groups in the country, Jata and Mona, with a turnover of 200 million euros. We contribute to the diversity and resilience of European food markets through a wide range of products that we develop and produce ourselves, and supply the products to 28 countries worldwide. We are particularly proud of our fully integrated farm-to-fork production model. By maintaining control over every stage of the production chain, we can ensure high standards, while preserving a personal and close relationships with our farmers and partners. That being said, one of the key limiting factors in achieving our vision for the future is that we face disproportionate barriers to growth. As you can see on this chart, Slovenia's agricultural land consists mainly of permanent grasslands that are often, more often than not, environmentally protected areas, like Natura 2000. Development opportunities are therefore already limited. At the same time, agriculture is often overlooked in spatial planning, and rural infrastructure remains insufficient. Therefore, developing poultry production requires more investments. This challenge is especially evident among the small and medium-sized family farms, which form the backbone of our production network. Their investment costs, calculated per square meter of a facility, are unproportionately greater to those of a mega-farm complex. In our case, our production is based on individual contract farmers with individual poultry houses, which are geographically dispersed. However, many of these farmers are now leaving poultry production, and fewer young people are willing to continue the activity. Despite higher costs, a key reason for many farmers to choose not to invest remains uncertainty. Faced with lengthy permitting procedures, unpredictable costs, and unclear additional requirements, many deliberately remain below the 40,000 bird threshold rather than expand above it. The consequences are greater. Rural communities lose jobs, investment, and long-term economic activity. Many farms depend on a single farmer, a single employee, and fewer young people are willing to take over the business. If this trend continues, PUCA is not only at risk of lack of new capacities, we are also at risk of losing 28% of our current production capacity, as well as the next generation of farmers. The greatest paradox I see is that legislation intended to improve environmental outcomes can sometimes become a barrier to achieving them. We know that modern poultry houses reduce emissions, improve animal welfare, lower energy consumption, and provide better resource management. Yet, permitting procedures often delay this investment for years, and we continue to produce indated systems. The problem is not necessarily environmental regulation itself. Farmers can adapt to pragmatic, strict standards. The real challenge is in the predictability. Investors often do not know how long a procedure will take, which authority will decide, or what additional requirements may emerge during the process, during which many situations can occur. As seen in our own case, in our own existing facilities, we can see how local authorities have redesignated agricultural land for tourism and recreational development. Despite its long-standing use for food production, poultry farms that have operated since 1978 are facing pressure to relocate, and investment in modernization and sustainability improvements are being blocked. The municipality is requesting a relocation agreement without providing compensation for the construction of new facilities or infrastructure. It has also blocked modernization efforts at the current location by refusing easement rights for solar installation and withholding consent required for environmental permitting. Another consequence of all this is public perception. When projects required years of approval and face repeated objections, the public can easily conclude that poultry farming is inherently problematic. This makes municipalities more reluctant to designate land for agricultural development and discourages the investments in supporting activities such as renewable energy projects, composting, and manure processing. Ultimately, we are facing a growing contradiction. Consumers, policymakers, and society all want local food, shorter supply chains, and greater food security, but often not the production facilities needed to deliver them nearby. But food security cannot be imported, and sustainable food system cannot exist without sustainable farms. As I conclude, I would like to emphasize that farmers are not asking for lower standards. We support environmental protection, animal welfare, and sustainable food production. In fact, the investments we are trying to make are designed to improve precisely those outcomes. What farmers need is predictability. We need permitting procedures that are coordinated, transparent, and completed within the reasonable time frame. We need agriculture to be recognized as a strategic activity within spatial planning. And we need a regulatory environment that encourages rather than delays investment in sustainability. As Europe is asking farmers to become more sustainable, more efficient, and more resilient, farmers are willing to make those investments. However, sustainable food production requires not only sustainable farms, but also sustainable regulation. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, j'ai une bonne...
Thank you very much. Now, I have some good and some bad news. The good news is that I saw that all of you had, or more or less all of you had, a bottle of water next to you. But the bad news now is that we're not going to go to the coffee break, actually, because we're late. But if you want, of course, you can go and grab a cup of coffee. And but that way we will be able to have a short discussion, because we absolutely need to finish at 5 p.m. and we still have 3 speakers who need to take the floor. We're now going to start, or maybe I can give you 5 minutes to go grab a cup of coffee, but 5 minutes only. It's currently 16:14, then 2 minutes only. At 16:16 we resume.
Nous allons maintenant démarrer le 3e et dernier panel qui se concentre également sur des cas concrets, mais en lien avec des entreprises innovantes qui utilisent des nouvelles technologies. Je donne la parole à Madame Claire-Lise Spacer, qui représente l'European Biogas Association. Madame Spacer, vous avez la parole pour 10 minutes.
Je vous remercie. Alors, je vais mettre mon timer comme ça. On est sûr que ça passe. Donc, je vais m'exprimer en français. Donc, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Carly Spicer. Je représente aujourd'hui l'IBIE, donc qui est l'Association européenne du biogaz, qui rassemble 350 membres représentant l'entière chaîne de valeur du biométhane. Et je suis ici pour vous parler des problèmes concrets que nous rencontrons tous les jours sur le terrain. Auprès des agriculteurs qui tentent de développer des projets ou qui opèrent des projets. Donc déjà, pour juste savoir à qui je m'adresse, qui n'a aucune connaissance du biogaz ou du biométhane, qui n'en a jamais entendu parler? Vous pouvez lever la main. Personne. Qui sait faire la différence entre le biogaz et le biométhane? Personne non plus? Ah, si. Super. Bon, pour faire court, on va placer des résidus organiques, pour notre cas principalement des effluents d'élevage, des résidus agricoles, mais aussi des résidus alimentaires des mairies ou des hôpitaux, des communes, des collectivités, dans une poche fermée sans oxygène, et on va venir capter le méthane qui se dégage de la dégradation de ces matières. Ça produit en plus de ce méthane renouvelable une soupe que l'on appelle le digestat et qui est en réalité un fertilisant local et décarboné, ainsi que du CO2 biogénique si on le purifie et qu'on l'injecte dans le réseau. Et donc ça me permet de faire le lien avec ma position actuelle au sein de GRDF, un opérateur de réseau de distribution de gaz, auprès de qui j'opère comme directrice des affaires publiques pour les gaz verts. Et donc mon métier est de promouvoir les gaz verts au niveau européen, mais surtout également français. Et donc, je suis ici aujourd'hui pour vous parler de tous les travaux que nous engageons chez GRDF auprès des agriculteurs. Pour faire court, le biométhane est déjà produit aujourd'hui en Europe. On est à peu près à 5,2 BCM, donc on va atteindre à peu près 8 BCM pour 2026. Les chiffres vont être transmis par l'IBIE dans quelques semaines. Pour vous parler de la France, qui est le leader actuellement de production de biométhane, donc de biogaz épuré et injecté dans le réseau, on a aujourd'hui à peu près plus de 16 TWh de capacité de production, ce qui représente 2 tranches de réacteurs nucléaires. Donc c'est significatif. Et la particularité de la France, c'est qu'on a pour la plupart adopté un modèle agricole de taille relativement petite, entre 13 et 18 gigawattheures, pour pouvoir capter l'essentiel du potentiel de production de matières agricoles qui sera de 138 TWh à 2050. Donc notre enjeu à nous, en France en tout cas, c'est de pouvoir accompagner le plus possible les agriculteurs dans leurs projets de méthanisation, s'ils ont cet intérêt pour l'entrepreneuriat, ou de faire des liens entre le monde agricole et d'autres développeurs de projets, industriels ou des coopératives, afin que les projets puissent se monter. Donc ça, c'est la photo actuelle. Mais la question qu'on me pose souvent, c'est oui, mais y aura-t-il assez de potentiel et d'intrants et de déchets pour remplacer entièrement le gaz fossile à échéance 2050? Eh bien oui. Après, tout dépend bien sûr qu'est-ce qu'on entend par consommation de gaz fossile. On a aussi intérêt, et c'est la volonté de GRDF, de diviser par 2 les volumes de gaz distribués, donc il y a bien une baisse des consommations. On conserve des consommations de gaz fossile là où on en a le plus besoin, notamment pour gérer les pics de demande d'énergie électrique, notamment en hiver dans le chauffage. Et on va venir développer tout un tas d'autres technologies complémentaires à la digestion anaérobie. Voilà, c'était pour vous faire court sur les gaz verts. Et maintenant, attaquons le cœur du sujet, qui est bien le permitting agricole. Chez GRDF, comme je vous l'ai dit, on a à cœur d'accompagner le secteur agricole dans le montage et le développement des projets. On a plus de 40 managers qui sont là sur le terrain, au jour le jour, pour justement accompagner le monde agricole. Et on a pu développer cette petite fleur que vous voyez en haut, qui représente la grande variété des bottlenecks dans le processus de permitting des projets agricoles. Premièrement, il faut avoir assez de feedstock, assez d'intrants durables. Pourquoi est-ce que c'est un problème? Car les fermes, ou en tout cas les unités agricoles, ne sont en général pas assez grandes pour alimenter un méthaniseur. Elles ont donc besoin de s'agréger avec d'autres producteurs de déchets. Et là, on voit donc de grandes difficultés puisqu'il faut demander les autorisations tout simplement pour pouvoir traiter ces déchets. Et donc là, il y a tout un tas de régulations qui vont venir entrer en jeu. Ou en tout cas, en France, on a aussi un autre problème, c'est que les administrations régionales, locales, ne sont pas d'accord entre elles. Donc dans certains départements ou dans certaines régions, on peut mélanger des bouts d'industrie agroalimentaire avec des effluents d'élevage. Dans d'autres, nous ne pouvons pas, sans aucune raison autre que les interprétations divergent. Ensuite, il faut trouver ce qu'on appelle un lieu approprié, où on va pouvoir avoir le permis de construire, qui sera autorisé par la mairie et donc par les citoyens. Et ça nous amène à un troisième grand bottleneck, qui est l'acceptation locale. Et donc nous accompagnons vraiment les agriculteurs et les porteurs de projets afin de pouvoir, le plus possible, recueillir l'acceptation locale. En développant des projets de taille raisonnable qui répondent aux enjeux locaux, en permettant aussi de valoriser les coproduits comme le digesta et le pseudo-biogénique, mais aussi en engageant les citoyens et les maires le plus tôt possible dans le développement du projet. Enfin, vous avez justement la question du digesta. A-t-on assez de surface pour épandre le digesta? Peut-on valoriser de manière agronomique qui fasse sens ce digesta? Et là, on se rend compte qu'on a également des problèmes de permitting, puisque si vous épandez un digesta sous un statut de déchet, vous allez avoir besoin d'un permis d'épandage qui peut prendre entre 6 mois et 2 ans à être traité. Ce n'est pas toujours le cas, mais c'est des cas qu'on rencontre assez régulièrement. Ensuite, si vous voulez faire du biométhane, vous devez pouvoir avoir accès au réseau de distribution, ou en tout cas un réseau de gaz pour pouvoir injecter votre gaz. Ce qui n'est pas toujours possible, et c'est là où GRDF a son rôle à jouer. Et enfin, après tout ça, vous avez également besoin de financeurs et d'avoir une gouvernance de projet qui puisse permettre au projet d'aboutir. Tout ça pour dire que l'aventure entrepreneuriale d'un agriculteur quand il veut monter un projet est immense, et que tous les projets de biogaz et de biométhane qui sont sortis et qui roulent et qui produisent aujourd'hui sont le fruit d'une ambition héroïque, en tout cas, de la part des agriculteurs, et on peut les féliciter pour ça. Dans les policy recommendations qu'on a pu développer au cours du temps, on a premièrement la question de pouvoir garantir sur le long terme un revenu suffisant pour pouvoir couvrir le risque qui est pris par les porteurs de projets agricoles. Dans les États membres où le biométhane est toujours en développement, on préconise typiquement des subventions directes pour les études de faisabilité, pour le CAPEX aussi, pour pouvoir permettre aux porteurs de projets agricoles de garantir et de mettre en cash les 20 à 30% demandés par les financeurs en général, et des subventions à la production de long terme sur 15 ans par exemple, pour permettre aussi au business model de faire sens. Dans les États membres un peu plus matures, où on a déjà une production de biométhane, on est plutôt favorable à la mise en place d'obligations d'incorporation et le développement de Biomethane Purchase Agreements, qui permettra justement de faire le lien avec des porteurs de projets et des producteurs agricoles, avec un monde plutôt d'énergéticiens, du trading, pour justement l'achat sur le moyen ou long terme des volumes. Ensuite, on demande tout simplement aussi à faciliter le processus de permitting en amont de la construction, mais aussi pendant l'opération du site, car il faut savoir qu'au jour le jour, opérer un site de biométhane, c'est une charge administrative qui peut être très lourde et qui n'est pas toujours possible à être supportée par les acteurs agricoles. Donc on demanderait par exemple à ce qu'il y ait une harmonisation des réglementations, notamment les directives déchets, au niveau et des États membres, mais aussi au niveau des régions. On a aussi tout un tas de bonnes pratiques qu'on peut et qu'on partage déjà avec d'autres porteurs dans d'autres États membres sur l'acceptabilité sociale. Ensuite, et on n'en a pas trop parlé encore, mais il y a tout le processus de certification RED. Toutes les unités n'y sont pas soumises, mais une bonne partie en sont soumises, notamment si on va vers un modèle où il n'y a plus de subventions à la production, mais bien où on a besoin de faire développer le marché. Et là, on se rend compte qu'en fait, on est face à une certification qui a été pensée pour les biocarburants liquides et qui n'est pas forcément adaptée à la méthanisation. On va demander à des unités de méthanisation et des petits agriculteurs de fournir tout un tas d'éléments, de fournir tout un tas de papiers et de remplir à des critères et de passer par des audits multiples et diverses pour se faire certifier pour 3, 4, 5, 6 schémas différents, ce qui n'est pas faisable en l'état pour des petites unités de méthanisation. Donc ça, on demande aussi à ce que ce soit revu et adapté dans le cadre notamment de la RED 4 qui va venir. Enfin, il faudrait pouvoir valoriser à sa juste valeur les coproduits de la méthanisation que sont le CO2 biogénique et le digesta. Je ne vais pas rentrer dans le détail, mais il y a énormément de choses à faire. Comme l'a dit la personne qui représentait la DG Environnement, il y a notamment la révision de la directive nitrate pour permettre d'ajouter du digesta aux 180 kg de N par hectare et par an, mais tout aussi un tas d'autres mesures qui pourraient nous permettre de mieux valoriser le business case des agriculteurs et donc faciliter le permitting. Puis enfin, il faut pouvoir injecter dans le réseau, et pour ça, on demande tout simplement à ce qu'il y ait un suivi effectif de l'implémentation par les États membres de la directive sur le marché du gaz et le droit à l'injection. Voilà, j'ai respecté le timing.
C'est vraiment magnifique et c'était très clair. Nous passons maintenant du biogaz à l'éthanol durable fabriqué à partir de matières premières renouvelables. Pour nous en parler, je passe la parole à Monsieur Laurent Lambert, directeur de la société BioOnce. Monsieur Lambert, vous avez la parole pour 10 minutes, les mêmes que votre voisine.
And I will put the same timer. Okay. So I'm from the company BioOnce. BioOnce is a bioethanol producing company located in the south part of Belgium. And by the way, I was living in the same neighborhood as you during our childhood. And now we are lucky to have a good representative of the region in the European Parliament, so thank you for that. BioOnce is part of the Suzuki Group. It's a large sugar manufacturer from Germany, and I'm part of the I would say, division called Crop Energies. Crop Energies has 4 bioethanol factories in Europe, and I'm representing one of them, and that's the one here that you can see on the picture in BioOnce. That's BioOnce. It's located in the heart of a city, so we have also to live with our neighborhood. So BioOnce is the largest producer of bioethanol in Belgium, with the valorization of agricultural crops to over 300,000 cubes of ethanol. Today, Belgium, for the transport, needs only 260. So we are largely producing more than what is really required for the transport. And Belgium capacity is the double of that. Belgium is able to produce 600,000 cubes. We are producing ethanol, but we are also producing proteins. So we are even producing more proteins than ethanol. And then what is important for us, for sure, is that the ethanol is leading to a reduction of greenhouse gases. 1 liter of ethanol is reducing, comparing to 1 liter of gasoline, leads to a reduction of 80% of CO2 emissions. So we like to say that we provide people with product to help them defossilize the transportation. What also is remarkable at BioOnce is that 90% of our energy is biomass. It can be internal biomass, as we are burning part of the bran from the wheat. And also what is remarkable is that we are capturing the CO2 to liquefy it and to put then back into the carbonated drink sectors or medical sector. We are, I think we are a full circular model because for sure we make use of all of the plants. Every part of the wheat is valorized, B for ethanol, B for the proteins, and the proteins can be the gluten. Gluten is used for food, for the bakery sector, or can be used also for the salmon. The big advantage of the gluten is that it will not dissolve in the water, so that it can agglomerate the food ration of the salmon, and it can grab it easily in the water without being it dispersed. And then we produce also liquid proteins for pig farming, cows, and so on. Then we produce green energy, as I mentioned, and we are autosufficient in electricity. All the ashes from the combustion of biomass are also coming back to the fields as fertilizers. So, okay, I will not repeat, but basically we are sure that bioethanol is contributing to mitigate the climate change. And what is important is to note that every gram of carbon is measured or it's counted from the farm to the factory, so that we must demonstrate that what we claim, this 80% greenhouse gas saving, is true. So we have the ambitions to be neutral in our energy. So we are from the beginning we decided to go for biomass energy, and this allows us to save around 230,000 tons of CO2 every year. We are still left with 18,000 CO2 emitted in the atmosphere from our energy system, and our ambition for sure is to go to zero. And same with the carbon capture, we started with 55,000 tons, and our aim is to more than double this amount. So it means that today, anyway, we are carbon negative if you make the sum of all this in our factory. The group has also the ambition to develop further into the bio-based chemicals. So with the biorefinery today, we can do the bioethanol, but the ethanol is also today 1/3 of the production of biomass is also purified in Dunkerque, France, for the drinking sector, for instance. So we sell alcohol to Pernod Ricard in France, for instance, or Cointreau. We go for the gin in UK, and we even go to Poland for the vodka. You have opportunity to drink. I think it's the Viborova vodka, if I remember well. But we use also the ethanol for the cosmetic sector, and then we go more for the Guerlain, Chanel, Dior, and so on. But we would like to go a step further to the green chemistry with the ethyl acetate. And so we are currently building a plant in the East Germany to produce ethyl acetate from ethanol. Ethyl acetate, you might know it. It's from the glue, for instance, the typical smell of a glue, or you can use it to remove the color of your nails. It is also used for coatings and paints and so on. And so I'm coming now to the subject. What kind of difficulties we have and how to overcome it. First, what we see very often is that the European community has the inconvenience to change the rule often once investment has been done. So from the very beginning, as I mentioned, BioWars decided to invest in a biomass cogeneration. It was costly, it was painful, and it took a long time to develop it. It was kind of a first kind of its generation. But today, with the Red Tree, Europe decided to change the rules. And now the threshold to be eligible to subsidies and help has been set at 80% of GHG savings compared to normal energy production. So it means, what if you are 75? It's a situation where you have it all or you don't have anything left. if you have 75% savings, you will close the factory because you don't get any help. So what's good for the climate in this? You will close an asset that cost several millions, took time to develop, and that will be useless. So that's the point we like to make, that when you change a regulation, we need to be really careful on what we do, and we would have preferred a progressive rule, so, or even let the people who were the front runners, as mentioned by, to keep their advantages. They took the risk. Why are they punished? Second, we see always a regulation with good intention, and it's the intention of the Commission to regulate, that's for sure. But when it comes to application, there we have big issues. And I will take a first example is the union database, for instance, that should have been in place for quite a long now. I think the objective is fair, is to make sure there is no illegal, I would say, import of fake, I would say, biofuels or fake raw material. But at the end, what we see is UDB is targeting the European farmers with complexity. When it comes to training, the training is only available in English. The training is done by and I have nothing against that, but by Asian English, so with a super difficult language to understand, even if you speak English. And at the end, not a single support is planned for the future. So if you come with this complex system called UDB, you have an issue somewhere, you have nobody to call. And it's not planned by the Commission to have a help desk or whatever to call. So I think when we do regulation, we need to be a little bit more careful. Second point, and that's the one we are quite worried about these days, is the emission assessment for cultivation. As we are producing bioethanol, we have to demonstrate the CO2 content of the ethanol. And most of the ethanol, and I'm coming to the next slide maybe, most of the CO2 is coming from the cultivation today. And for that, the member states have to demonstrate to the European Commission the cultivation value of the farmers. And it's split by nuts entity, which in Belgium is the provinces. The thing is, if you don't have the nuts value, then you are left with the disaggregated default value, which for us are kind of helpless. It's really reduced the GHG savings we have, and it prevents us from also valorizing waste fraction into biofuel. And today what happened in Wallonia and in Belgium is that basically it has been more than 1 year that the nuts value has been proposed to the Commission. It come to the first committee, it was accepted, and then we were asking, okay, it has been accepted back in, if I remember well, back in July last year. And then when we come back to the administration to ask where are we now, they say, oh, we have nobody left to treat this file. We will not be able to treat it before autumn. So autumn is after the crops. It's at the time where we need to do the contract with the grain traders for the plant supply. But then for us, it costs 5 million euro more to purchase Walloon wheat. So what will we do? We will purchase French wheat because France has already this nut value agreed upon. So it's a big problem, and we have no solution. And finally, now we learn that the file from the Belgian authorities need to be reworked, but we just learned it this month in June, right? So we don't know now when we could at least have those nuts value, this emission, cultivation emission, when we can use it. So for sure we will keep purchasing wheat from Belgium, but it come at a cost for us, and we have to favor a little bit more the French wheat, which makes no sense. From our point of view, we are a local company, we want to work with local players. So I will accelerate because I'm already over the 10 minutes. Yeah, just then we spoke about objectives, right? The objective of the Commission should be to defossilize the transport, and today EU is only focusing on electrification, and we see that for bioethanol, we see that bioethanol is not that bad, right? It provides proteins, so means food for the people. It provides outlet for the farmers. And at the end, it provides defossilization of the transport. So why are we capped at 7% today of usage? So let's increase the cap for the first G ethanol, and then also why, for instance, why do we have to pay the same taxes on bioethanol as on gasoline? One for electricity, it's free of tax, yeah, for the transport. And then very last point is on the industrial deployment. So as I mentioned, the group was bold enough to invest in the bio-based chemicals. The plant is deemed to start by 2027, but today we are not sure it will make profit. Today it might be stopped as soon as it starts because there is no incentives to produce based on bio-based chemicals or on bio-based product. So there. I think first Europeans should allow first generation crop, first generation feedstock to be used for those kind of products, and also we think that some mechanisms could be put in place, and the group proposed a mechanism called CATS for carbon utilization trading system. The idea is that on the final product, based on the carbon content of the product, not on the raw material, but carbon content of the final product, wherever it comes from, we could have a certificate that says you can. It's from renewable origin. So that's it for me. I thank you for your kind listening.
Merci beaucoup, Laurent. Last but not least, Monsieur Krops, qui dirige le département émissions liées à l'élevage au sein du HBLFA Rumberstein, le plus grand institut de recherche autrichien placé sous l'autorité du ministère fédéral de l'Agriculture et des Forêts, de la protection du climat et de l'environnement, des régions et de la gestion de l'eau. Monsieur Hopsch, vous avez 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Kopsch, my name. I'm coming from Austria. And today we heard a lot of regulations of laws, about nature. And one thing is in these laws and in this what our farmers are faced to is reduction of emissions. You all know this. You told us from Poland these things, and we know it also. The same thing in Austria, odor, noise, dust. We know this. So I'll tell in the next few minutes something about the new technology we investigated in a project. It's for emission reduction in conventional pig fattening farming. And we did this project 3-4 years ago under this AEP Agri license. Is funded by the European Commission. And this AEP Agri projects, you always have 3 partners. One from the scientific part. This was our lead in Raumberg-Gumpenstein. Then you have someone from the practice. So this means a farmer. This was the company called Jagerssteirerei. So it's a special Styrian name. And you have, of course, someone from the company. And this was from Schauer Electronic. And the system was developed from colleagues from my side and also from Schauer. And this project had the name Salud, which means in English, clean air out of livestock husbandry. And you see here, this is the Salud stable, the Salud barn as we call it. And now I will introduce you to this stable and this barn and what is there combined. This barn combines low emissions with animal welfare. If you look at the scheme, at the sketch above, you see that there are 3 zones there. You have a resting zone, you have a feeding zone and excretion zone. And if you go to the animal welfare side, we have these separate functional areas. Then we use inside, so in the warm area, straw dust free. Then a lying area in the rest house in the warm area is adjustable to animal weight. And of course, which is very important, you have this outdoor area where the pigs have access to outdoor climate. If we come to the low emission side, there are many measures are completed in this one system. We have on the one hand protein adjusted feeding. We have on the other side this manure urine separation. So if you look at the excretion zone, you see behind there is a special technique that the manure and urine is separated so that production of ammonia and odor is avoided or lowered. We have, and this is also very important, I think it's getting more and more important as we see it today, nowadays, if it is hot out there, and inlet air cooling. We have this inlet air cooling at the right side. You see there's this blue box. I will give you some photos later. And what's also very important in this outdoor climate area, that this is covered with a roof, because to not only insulated, but to keep out rain and sun. This is very important. Here we have a look at this barn. This is the outside climate area. We see in the front the pigs, they are above this excretion zone where urine interfaces are separated, and behind these pigs are standing in the feeding zone. And here, this is one of the main things I mentioned, this inlet air cooling, the channel down so beneath this building, beneath this barn, and you see in the back there are vents, and these vents, they put cool air in this channel, and the cool air is coming from outside. The air is going through, you call it, so it's water trickling where the air goes through, and so the air is cooled. So we call it cool beds in Germany, or in German English, cool beds. So you get cool air which is put in this channel, and then this is inside the barn where you see the slated floor, and through the slateds the air is going very slow, very diffuse in this warm area we call, and it's cooling in summer, and also in winter you can do a little. You have, because of this channel, a little bit of warming from the air. I talked that the theme is emissions. It means in Austria, especially at the case, what we look here now is ammonia and odor. And one thing we did was to measure at the source, so inside the stable and at the outside area with this FTER. You see at the slides some measuring points point inside the barn, so in the resting zone, then outside in the excretion zone, and behind at the feeding zone. And if you look to this chart, we measured 4 times a year, in spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and always for 10 days. And with these different color lines, these are the resting area, the feeding area, and the excretion area represented. And if you look at these 4 charts, you see that we never reached the concentration of 4 ppm ammonia. And if you are used to ammonia emissions in completely closed, forced ventilated warm stables, you know that they are much higher. So we did a comparison. The blue columns are that from the salute barn, and at the same time measurements at the very closed warm stable with forced ventilation, so you have 2 to 3 times higher ammonia emissions. But it was not only the goal to look at the emissions, because it's very important. We had this today from the Natura 2000 directive, what is coming outside in the nature, what is going down, and so we looked for the ammonia emissions. We made this with this so-called radiellos. They sample ammonia, and these radiellos were put on several sticks, as you see, around the stable. So you see here that at every circle there was one stick with this radioella on it, and so we knew at these points you see here what the concentration of ammonia was there. And then we did thing you see here, it's a dispersion modeling, and it's a reversed dispersion modeling. So we know the concentration of ammonia at the points, but we didn't know how high it is, how high the emission factor is. So it was calculated from the colleague. He adjusted the emission factor at the barn side. So the emission side is the open barn, and was so long adjusted until we had the same results in the circles, so at the points where we measured ammonia and where the calculation was. And from this, we got out an emission factor for ammonia for 0.73 kilogram ammonia per livestock unit and year. And if you compare this to a Germany standard, it is VDI 38941, there is used 3.64 kilogram ammonia per year in livestock unit. So it means we had with this system lowering about 80% of ammonia emissions. In Austria is also a very hot topic, odor. Mainly complaints from the neighborhood. Odor is a hot topic in every building proceedings. And what we made is, I don't know if you know this is called odor walk. It's also a standardized method. And these 10, 11 people walked out there also on certain points around the stable. And this lasts over half a year. And on certain time a day, certain time the week, they have to get on these positions around the stable and to stand there for some minutes, and they have to sniff. And they have to mark if they smell big or not. And these are here the points where the people were running around this half a year. And from this, what the programs register out there, you can calculate the odor units over a year. And it was also made from the colleague that he made a reverse dispersion calculation. So also tried so long adjust the emission factor for odor that we had the same results at the measuring points as in the dispersioning modeling. We have a project report. I translated this with this European Commission tool into English, so we will give it to the set of data from today's session. So if anyone wants to go deeper in it, please feel free to download it. So summing up, and to be within the 10 minutes, if this system, and it works, and nowadays we have several of these barns are built in Germany. So the company Schauer is very busy building such new stables in Germany. There is no need for an air scrubber or biofilter. I forgot to say that the calculation from odor was a reduction of at least 95%. So in this case, there's no need for air scrubber or biofilter. We saw emission reduction. We have more animal welfare. You can use wood as building material, which is a very good view from my side. And what we also observed is lower disease susceptibility from the animals. So often we go without showering with foreign peoples in the stables and nothing happens because they are used to the outside air, they have cleaner air maybe, and one big thing is that the excretion area is not the whole area of the stable, but only this excretion zone. So, thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm welcome your questions.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, directement dans la foulée, je vais passer la parole à ma collègue Céline Imard, parce qu'elle a un autre rendez-vous qui suit, et puis on fera un petit débat avec la salle.
Merci beaucoup, cher Benoît. Bonjour à tous, je suis ravie d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui, et bien évidemment, je tiens d'abord à remercier mon collègue Benoît Cassard pour son invitation à conclure cette réunion de travail de l'intergroupe. Son thème est fondamental parce qu'il touche à une des principales difficultés de notre agriculture, c'est l'accumulation des obstacles qui empêchent trop souvent nos éleveurs de travailler, d'investir, de se développer. Donc comme Benoît et nombre de nos collègues, je m'efforce de défendre les mesures qui vont dans le bon sens, dans le sens d'une véritable simplification au bénéfice du secteur de l'élevage. Nous ne pouvons pas, d'un côté, affirmer vouloir renforcer la sécurité ou même la souveraineté alimentaire de l'Europe, et de l'autre, continuer à imposer toujours plus de réglementation à nos éleveurs. Ils doivent aujourd'hui faire face à des contraintes de plus en plus lourdes et la liste est longue. Des procédures souvent kafkaïennes lorsqu'ils souhaitent agrandir un bâtiment d'élevage ou construire un nouveau bâtiment d'élevage. Des obligations assez lourdes relatives au bien-être animal et très souvent déconnectées dans leur application de la réalité du terrain. Menace permanente aussi de recours judiciaires intentés par des ONG, souvent totalement étrangères aux projets concernés, mais dont la seule raison d'être de ces ONG, c'est vraiment de casser du sucre sur le dos de ceux qui produisent notre alimentation carnée. À cela s'ajoute une incertitude constante sur les futures exigences environnementales. Et comme si cela ne suffisait pas, ce sont également les éleveurs qui payent en priorité, avec les viticulteurs, la concurrence déloyale provenant des pays tiers, mais aussi toutes les mesures de rétorsion commerciale, et je pense notamment aux mesures chinoises. Donc, grosso modo, nos éleveurs sont pris en étau entre une charge réglementaire trop lourde à l'intérieur et une concurrence internationale et une guerre géopolitique qui en fait les premiers sacrifiés sur le pire des deux mondes. Donc pour autant, je pense que nous ne devons pas céder au fatalisme et c'est pour ça que je remercie Benoît de beaucoup travailler sur tous ces sujets qui parlent de bioéconomie, qui parlent de valorisation différente. En tant que députés européens, nous avons la responsabilité de saisir l'opportunité aujourd'hui que nous offrent les mesures de simplification proposées par la Commission. Elles demeurent insuffisantes, c'est un fait, mais elles doivent être le point de départ en fait d'un changement de mindset, d'un changement de paradigme dans l'approche de l'élevage et de la reconnaissance de l'élevage, non seulement comme une valeur économique, mais aussi comme une valeur territoriale et sociale. À cet égard, en tant que rapporteur de mon groupe sur l'omnibus environnement, je défends une chose essentielle, je pense, qui est la sortie de l'élevage du champ d'application de la directive IED, émissions industrielles. On ne peut pas traiter nos éleveurs de porc ou de volaille aujourd'hui comme s'ils étaient des gros fabricants avec des grosses usines et des cheminées qui tournent aux centrales à charbon. Ce n'est pas possible. La révision adoptée en 2024 élargit beaucoup trop le champ d'application de la directive. Dans le secteur avicole, donc de la volaille par exemple, on passerait de 10 à 56% en France des exploitations de volailles concernées par l'application de la directive IED. Les conséquences, on les connaît déjà, ce serait la fermeture des exploitations, la fragilisation aussi de la chaîne de valeur avec les abattoirs, les filières locales, des menaces évidemment sur l'emploi agricole et agroalimentaire et évidemment un affaiblissement de notre souveraineté alimentaire avec un recours accru aux importations de poulets du Brésil ou d'Ukraine. Donc la simplification que propose la Commission ne va pas assez loin. Je pense notamment à certaines dispositions préoccupantes concernant les mécanismes d'indemnisation de tiers en cas de non-respect des dispositions de la directive. Je pense aussi aux obligations dites de transparence qui imposeraient la publication des rapports d'inspection des exploitations pour rendre ces informations accessibles à tous, ce qui serait vraiment assez catastrophique pour les éleveurs. Les contrôles d'inspection, ça doit relever de la responsabilité des autorités compétentes et rien ne justifie qu'on puisse jeter en pâture les pratiques de nos éleveurs au grand public. Il en va de même pour l'accès à la justice. Seules les personnes directement concernées par un projet devraient avoir un intérêt à agir en justice contre un projet d'élevage. Sinon, nous ouvrons la porte à des recours multiples, sans lien direct, qui accroître l'insécurité juridique et la charge mentale aussi déjà très élevée de nos éleveurs. Donc, à force d'accumuler les règles inadaptées, nous finissons par fragiliser une activité qui est essentielle pour préserver nos savoir-faire, notre patrimoine culturel, notre économie, plus largement notre souveraineté alimentaire européenne et notre identité. Donc, le Parlement européen a un rôle essentiel à jouer pour répondre réellement aux besoins et aux réalités du terrain. Et donc, c'est ce que je m'emploie à faire, c'est ce que Benoît s'emploie à faire aussi. Nous agissons ensemble de concert et nous espérons gagner ces batailles. Je vous remercie.
J'ai un peu peur parce que Caterina me regarde avec des grands yeux. l'air de dire on n'a plus trop de temps pour les questions, mais est-ce que quand même vous avez une question pour nos trois derniers intervenants? C'est toujours la même chose, ces intergroupes. C'est tellement passionnant qu'on est toujours un peu limite au niveau du timing. Stéphanie. Ouais, vas-y. Mais, écrit en français, mais... Ouais, viens à un micro, Stéphanie. Elle est coincée.
Alors moi je pense que la DG Environnement, la problématique de renouvellement des générations, puisqu'on a la moitié des agriculteurs en Europe qui arrivent à la retraite à l'horizon 2035, je pense que c'est le cadet de leurs soucis et qu'ils délègueront aisément ce genre de sujet et de comptage à la DG Agri. La véritable problématique de l'installation, c'est que je pense qu'elle ne se traite pas en silo. Et je pense que nous ne sommes pas sous un système russe, soviétique en 1917 où on peut décréter l'installation et obliger à ce que de manière numérique, on ait un départ à la retraite et une installation. Le vrai problème aujourd'hui, pourquoi les jeunes ont du mal à s'installer, il est sur la problématique du revenu et sur la problématique de la vivabilité. Aujourd'hui, plus aucun jeune qui arrive à la sortie de ses études et qui a 20 ans n'a envie de s'installer pour travailler 70 heures par semaine, pour prendre 7 à 800 euros par mois quand il arrive à se dégager un salaire, pour m'expliquer qu'en fait, s'il arrive à remplir son frigo et à nourrir ses enfants, c'est parce que son épouse travaille à l'extérieur et gagne un SMIC. Et donc, si on n'agit pas sur la problématique en premier du revenu, de manière globale, on ne peut pas inciter les jeunes à s'installer. Et la deuxième question pour les éleveurs, c'est la vivabilité. Elle se pose de manière extrêmement accrue parce que ce sont aussi les questions de l'élevage et de la consommation de viande, des sujets qui sont soumis à controverse. Et quand on arrive au centre du débat sociétal en se faisant traiter de maltraitants de manière permanente, en disant que on a une écologiste en France qui a déclaré que dans les menus des cartes de restaurants, il faudrait remplacer le mot steak ou entrecôte par cadavre d'animaux. Donc, vous voyez, on en est là, dans la logique. Quand on se prend de plein fouet des recours des riverains, des recours pour les nuisances olfactives, sonores, quand on travaille en permanence avec cette pression sur la tête en se disant « est-ce que je vais faire l'objet d'un recours en justice ?» C'est très compliqué aussi de réunir les conditions de la vivabilité. Donc oui, le renouvellement des générations, c'est une question qui doit être traitée, mais je pense qu'elle ne peut pas être traitée en silo.
Dominique ?
Toujours sur ce sujet qui est du renouvellement des générations.
Oui, mais...
je vais aller très vite, mais c'est fondamental. On ne peut pas parler du renouvellement des générations en complément de ce qu'a dit Céline si on s'intéresse juste aux individus. Il faut aussi s'intéresser aux véhicules, c'est-à-dire de l'exploitation qui va porter le renouvellement des générations, l'installation. Quelles seront les exploitations de demain est un sujet fondamental qu'il faut se poser, d'où le sujet d'aujourd'hui, à savoir des permis et des installations. Si on ne se pose pas la question quelles seront les exploitations de demain, alors on va passer à côté du renouvellement des générations. Voilà ce que je voulais dire.
Très bien. Voilà, super. Mais... C'est bon, là, je pense qu'on est quand même relativement plus ou moins dans les temps. Je voudrais dégager 3 idées que j'ai retenues aujourd'hui. Il y a, on l'a entendu, on l'a vu, des nouvelles technologies. L'environnement, les opérateurs s'en inquiètent. Il y a vraiment de nouvelles technologies. Ces nouvelles technologies, pour être implantées, deuxième idée, on doit faciliter la tâche des opérateurs en ayant des législations plus souples, plus adaptées à notre époque. On est dans un monde qui bouge vite, on doit bouger beaucoup plus vite dans ces matières-là. Troisième idée forte que j'ai retenue aujourd'hui, parce que je trouvais que la question était particulièrement pertinente, c'est la définition de la durabilité. Est-ce qu'on veut une durabilité basée sur l'extensif et la diminution de la production puis devoir importer d'ailleurs, parce que chez nous, on n'aura plus d'autonomie alimentaire, ou est-ce qu'on veut se concentrer sur une Europe autonome au niveau alimentaire, et bien sûr qui produit avec les nouvelles technologies pour avoir le moins d'impact possible sur l'environnement, mais de manière réaliste, de manière pragmatique et de manière équilibrée pour que les agriculteurs puissent aussi avoir un revenu. Je vous remercie beaucoup et je vous souhaite une bonne fin de journée. Pour ceux qui sont inscrits, on va avoir la chance de recevoir le commissaire à 18 h au Parlement qui va nous remettre sa stratégie en matière d'élevage suite aux travaux de l'intergroupe, mais aussi du rapport qui lui a été remis sur nos priorités pour l'élevage de demain. On va pouvoir discuter avec lui et vous êtes les bienvenus. Merci beaucoup.